The glass was already in his hand. Eleanor Ashford saw it from across the room and felt the bottom drop out of her stomach, not because of the glass itself, not because of the deep red wine catching the candlelight like something precious, but because of the man who had poured it. She had been watching him for 11 minutes. She knew it was 11 minutes because she had counted. Counting was something she did when her hands could not move, when social occasions required her to stand still and look pleasant, and pretend that her eyes were not doing what they were always doing, which was cataloguing everything in the room the way a person catalogues a space they might one day need to escape from. The footman's name, she would later learn, was Hargreaves. He was tall and thin with a face that gave nothing away, which was, in itself, a kind of answer. Men who served at great houses learned to make their faces blank. It was a professional requirement, but Hargreaves was blank in a different way. He was blank in the way of a man who had made a decision and settled it. There was no tension in him, no nervousness. Just a stillness that Eleanor recognized the way you recognize a smell from your childhood, not because you can name it immediately, but because your body already knows what it means before your mind catches up. She had first noticed him 40 minutes into the evening, when the guests of Windermere Park were still standing in the wide entrance hall, coats being taken, introductions being made, the usual choreography of English social gatherings that ran on precise ritual and almost never varied. The Countess of Halford, whose companion Eleanor technically was, had been absorbed immediately into a cluster of women near the fireplace, all of them speaking at once and none of them listening, which was the natural rhythm of such gatherings. Eleanor had drifted, as she always did, toward the edges. The edges of a room were more honest than its center. At the center, people performed. At the edges, people waited, and waiting, they revealed themselves. A man standing near a window who keeps checking the clock is nervous about something. A woman sitting alone who does not look at anyone coming through the door is not shy. She is watching for someone specific and does not want to be caught doing it. A footman who moves with the natural invisible purpose of a trained servant, but who pauses, just once, for 3 seconds too long beside the tray of glasses being prepared for the Duke's table. That footman is doing something that has nothing to do with serving wine. Eleanor had caught it, 3 seconds of stillness at the tray, his hand near the glasses, his body angled just slightly, shoulders turned just enough that anyone looking directly at him would see a man adjusting a placement. Anyone looking at the angle of his hands would see something else. She had not looked away after that. The house was everything Windermere Park was supposed to be, enormous and old, and cared for by people who understood that the real purpose of such care was not the house itself, but the impression it created. The grounds had been visible through the carriage window as they came up the long drive, oak trees so old they seemed bored by their own grandeur, lawns managed to an almost unnatural perfection, the house itself sitting at the end of the drive like a statement of permanent confidence. It was the kind of place that said without saying, "Things do not end here, things continue." Eleanor had attended enough such houses over the past 4 years that she had developed a complete immunity to being impressed by them. She was not immune to their usefulness, however. A house this size, with this many servants and this many guests, was a house full of angles and shadows and places where things could happen that no one would see unless they were specifically looking. She was always specifically looking. The Countess had introduced her to 3 people by the time they reached the drawing room, which meant Eleanor had exactly 3 people who expected her to make polite conversation before disappearing again. She managed the first 2 in under 7 minutes each, which left the third, a retired colonel named Ashby with enormous eyebrows and genuine interest in agricultural reforms, as a kind of pleasant problem because he was actually interesting and she had to be careful about interesting people. Interesting people made you want to stay and talk, and staying and talking meant you stopped watching. She excused herself from the colonel with the kind of gracious deflection she had spent years perfecting, which looked like warmth and operated like a clean exit, and she went back to watching. The drawing room at Windermere Park was the size of a small field. It had 3 fireplaces, all lit, which gave the space a warmth that was slightly too much, the kind of warmth that made women fan themselves and men loosen at their collars while pretending not to. The walls were hung with paintings that were very old and very good, and had the slightly mournful look of art that has not been really seen in generations. The furniture was deep and substantial. The carpets were the color of old blood, which Eleanor had always found to be a peculiar choice for a room meant to convey welcome. There were 41 guests, She had counted them the way she counted everything, automatically, efficiently, the way some people breathe. She knew from the Countess's advance information that the purpose of this particular gathering was the harvest celebration that the Duke of Windermere held every autumn, which was part tradition and part political theatre. The Duke had tenants and neighbors and creditors and allies and rivals, and once a year he gathered a selection of all of them under his roof and fed them and poured wine for them and let everyone observe everyone else. It was, the Countess had explained on the carriage journey, how things worked in this part of England. The Duke gathered his world came. Elinor had listened and nodded and spent the rest of the journey watching the hedgerows through the window, which was something she did when she was actually thinking about something else entirely. She had known the Duke's name before this evening, in the way one knows the names of significant people without ever having occasion to meet them. Adrian Cavendish, the 5th Duke of Windermere, 41 years old, unmarried, educated at Oxford, and then in ways that Oxford did not arrange. From what she had gathered, there was something in the way people spoke of him that suggested a man who had moved through the world on his own terms rather than his titles. He was responsible for the financial administration of several estates besides his own, had reportedly declined 2 positions in Parliament despite considerable pressure to accept them, and was known among those who dealt with him professionally to be the kind of man who read everything, remembered everything, and said very little. Elinor respected that last quality deeply. She practiced it herself. She spotted him easily, which she had expected, not because he was the most physically striking person in the room, though he was not inconspicuous, tall, dark-haired, with the kind of composed face that suggested either great patience or great control, and she was not yet sure which, but because of the way the room organized itself around him. People in rooms with powerful people always turn toward them without realizing they are turning. It is a social gravity. The Duke stood near the central fireplace speaking with a small group, and the rest of the room tilted very slightly in his direction, the way a field of grass tilts toward wind. Elinor did not tilt. She noted this about herself with a kind of dry amusement, and then redirected her attention toward the footman, who had just moved to the table where the Duke's personal wine was being laid out. She crossed the room, not quickly drew attention, and she had spent the better part of 4 years becoming a person nobody paid attention to, which was harder than it sounded and was, she considered, one of her genuine achievements. She moved the way she always moved in such situations, with the slightly purposeful air of a woman heading toward someone she could see across the room, which meant every person she passed registered her as occupied rather than unattached. Nobody stopped her. Nobody noticed her at all. She reached the table 2 minutes before the wine was due to be served to the Duke's immediate circle. Up close, Hargreaves was older than she had estimated from across the room, 50 perhaps. The lines around his eyes were deep, and his hands, which she watched carefully as she took a position nearby under the pretext of examining a silver display piece on the adjacent sideboard, were the hands of a man who had been a footman for a long time, but they were not moving with the calm economy of habit. There was a microscopic tension in his fingers, the smallest possible tremor in the wrist. She looked at the wine. Then she looked at the room. The Duke was still at the fireplace. He was laughing at something, a real laugh, she noticed, not the social performance of one, which meant he was turned slightly away from the drinks table. His immediate group was 3 people. A heavy-set man with a red face who had the particular look of someone who had been enjoying the pre-dinner drinks for longer than strictly necessary. A woman in pale green who was clearly related to someone important because she had the confident posture of a person who has never doubted their right to stand exactly where they are standing. And a younger man, perhaps 30, with watchful eyes and an alert stillness, who Elinor recognized, after a moment's assessment, as the Duke's private secretary. The secretary was watching the room. His eyes found hers. She did not look away immediately. She held it 2 seconds, which was long enough to communicate something and short enough not to make it a confrontation, and then she looked back at the sideboard. Her heart was going at a rather inconvenient pace. She was accustomed to it. She had learned over years of situations that required calm to treat her own physical responses as information rather than emergency. Her heart was fast. This meant she had already decided something. Her hands were steady. This meant she would follow through. She looked at Hargreaves one more time. He was turning away from the table. The wine glass, the specific glass that would be placed before the Duke, had been returned to the tray with a placement that was just slightly different from the others. Angled. Separated by half an inch more space than the others, a small marker, a way of ensuring the right glass reached the right person. Eleanor's mind went to a house she had been in 6 years ago, where she was not a companion but a wife, and where the person she loved had drunk something that was not what it appeared to be, and where no one had listened when she said that something was wrong, and where she had learned, at a cost she never spoke about, not once, not to anyone, that the world would not intervene in the things that happened in quiet rooms between people with power and people without it. She had learned something else too. She had learned that she was not prepared to watch it happen again. She took a quiet breath. She looked at the wine. She looked at the Duke, who was still laughing, still turned away, still surrounded by his world and entirely unaware that something in it had already been adjusted without his knowledge. She thought of 6 years ago. She thought of how useless it felt to be right when nobody believed you. She stepped forward. The footman was 4 feet away. The tray was on the table. The Duke's glass was the nearest one to her. She did what she had to do. She leaned in close to the footman's ear and she said, in a voice pitched for 2 people only, "Don't sip that." She was not certain he heard her. She was not certain it mattered. What happened next happened the way things happen when a body makes a decision slightly faster than the mind behind it. Her arm caught the edge of the tray. Not a fumble, she did not fumble. It was a deliberate motion executed to look like an accident, which is one of the more difficult physical things to do well, and she did it well enough that the woman in pale green later told 3 people she had witnessed a very clumsy accident. The glass went over, the wine went with it. It came down across the white tablecloth like something deliberate. It spread in the particular way that liquids spread when they have space, and no one is stopping them, outward and unstoppable, and really in the candlelight, it was almost beautiful in the way that catastrophes sometimes are, before you have finished understanding what has happened. The room did not go silent all at once. It went silent in sections, the way a crowd at a distance falls quiet when it understands that something has changed. First the people nearest the table, the footman, who had gone absolutely rigid, and the woman nearby who made a small sound of surprise, then the broader room, which registered the disruption as a change in noise and turned to look. Eleanor stood very still. She had the particular experience which she had had before and which never became ordinary, of 40 pairs of eyes finding her at once. She looked at the glass, she looked at the stain spreading across the cloth. She looked at the table and then she looked up, which is what you do when you are trying to give a situation space and calm, and the first face she found when she looked up was not the footman's face, and it was not the Countess's face from across the room. It was the Duke's. He was looking at her directly. He had turned at the sound. He was not angry. She searched his face for anger and did not find it. What she found was harder to name, a focused attention and assessment, and underneath both of those, something that looked like a man watching something very carefully because he suspected it was important. She felt her chin come up. It was not defiance, or not only defiance. It was the thing her body did when she had decided not to apologize for something. She waited for what always came next, the composed dismissal, the polite but firm removal, the careful social language for, "You have caused a disruption and you are not important enough for the disruption to be forgiven." The Duke looked at her for one long, unreadable moment, then he crossed the room. He was taller up close. She noticed this the way you notice things that your mind would ordinarily store and return to later, except that the moment was moving too quickly for storage. He stopped in front of her, and he looked at the glass, and he looked at the wine, and he looked at her. Then he reached out and he took her hand, not at the wrist, not the gesture of a man trying to guide someone away or contain a situation. He took her hand the way you take the hand of someone you are steadying. And he said quietly, low enough that it was only for her, 3 words. "I believe you." Eleanor Ashford had been in a great many rooms in her life, and she had heard a great many things said in them. She had heard kindness used as a weapon and cruelty dressed as concern. She had heard people say they believed things they had no intention of acting on, and she had heard people say nothing at all when nothing at all was the most damaging possible response. She had not heard those 3 words in that arrangement, in that tone directed at her, in longer than she could count. Her hand was not shaking, she had made sure of that. But she was aware of his hand around hers, warm, firm, the grip of a man who meant the gesture, and she was aware that the room was watching, and she was aware that something had shifted in the space of 3 words in a way she had not been prepared for. She said nothing, there was nothing adequate. The Duke held her gaze for another moment, then turned calmly to the room and said, in a completely normal voice, as if interrupting a dinner party by spilling wine was an entirely ordinary occurrence. "We'll have fresh glasses. Carry on." And the room, because it was that kind of room, and he was that kind of man, did exactly what he said. Elinor stood at the edge of the table with the Duke's warmth still faint on her fingers, and the wine still spreading across the cloth, and the footman somewhere behind her going very, very still, and she thought, with a clarity that was almost physical, he understood in 3 seconds what no one else has understood in 6 years. She did not know yet what to do with that. She filed it carefully in the part of herself she did not let anyone see, and she smoothed her expression, and she looked composed, and she waited for the evening to continue. The Countess appeared at her elbow 2 minutes later, flustered and smelling of rosewater and concern. "My dear," the Countess said, "are you quite all right? What on earth happened?" "I was clumsy," Elinor said. "I apologize for the interruption." "Don't be silly, these things happen," the Countess said, which was kind of her and entirely beside the point. Elinor smiled and said she was perfectly fine and let the Countess steer her toward a chair near the window, and she sat down, and she looked at the room, and her eyes found the footman. Hargreaves had not moved. He was still standing near the table, composed on the surface in the way he had been all evening, blank-faced still. But his hands, Elinor noticed, were clasped behind his back now. Clasped tight. He was staring straight ahead at nothing, and he did not look at the wine, and he did not look at the glass, and he did not look at Elinor. He looked like a man who had just realized that something had gone wrong that he did not yet understand, and who was working very hard not to show it. Elinor watched him and thought about what she knew and what she did not know, and what, if anything, she was going to do about the considerable difference between the two. Dinner was announced 20 minutes later. The guests filed through in the usual order. Elinor took her seat at the far end of the table, near the Countess, well away from the head where the Duke sat with his most important guests. She watched the food arrive and the wine be poured and the conversation begin to move in its familiar channels. The weather, the harvest, some London business that had been in the papers, a polite disagreement about something political that would never reach a conclusion because nobody at the table actually wanted to resolve it, they just wanted to have their position known. She ate without tasting much, she watched without appearing to watch. At the head of the table, the Duke engaged his guests with the even, attentive courtesy of a man who was very good at his job. He did not look at Elinor again that evening, not once, not that she was watching for it. She was watching for it. He did not look at her. But when the dinner finally concluded, and the guests began their slow migration toward the music room, where cards and conversation would occupy the rest of the evening, Elinor found herself walking through the same doorway as the Duke's private secretary, the young man with the watchful eyes, and he slowed his pace by half a step, just enough to fall into stride beside her. "Miss Ashford," he said, which meant he had either already known her name or had found it out during dinner, and either way was interesting. "Yes," she said. "My name is Fletcher," he said. "I work for the Duke." "I gathered," she said. He smiled very briefly, the way people smile when they have been observed doing something slightly more obvious than they intended. "The Duke would like a word with you." "At your convenience, nothing formal." Elinor looked at him steadily, about the wine. "Among other things," Fletcher said, and he was very good at keeping his face still, but his eyes were not quite as controlled as he thought they were, and what she read in them was not displeasure. It was relief. "Of course," she said, "tell him I am happy to speak with him." Fletcher nodded once and moved ahead through the doorway, and Elinor walked into the music room where a woman was playing something competent on the pianoforte, and the Countess was already deep in conversation near the far wall, and Elinor found a chair and sat in it and listened to the music, and did not think about the Duke's hand around hers or the 3 words or the footman's clasped hands. She thought about all of it very carefully and sorted it into what she knew and what she needed to find out. The evening continued around her, warm and candlelit and oblivious. Outside, the autumn wind pressed against the tall windows, and somewhere in the house, a footman named Hargreaves was deciding what to do next. Elinor already knew what she was going to do next. She was going to find out everything. He was gone by morning. Elinor learned this at 8:07, when she found Fletcher waiting in the corridor outside her guest room with the expression of a man who had not slept and was not going to mention it. She had already been awake for 2 hours. She had heard the sound of boots on the gravel path below her window at 5:30, quick, unhesitating footsteps, the footsteps of a man who had already made his decision and was simply acting on it. And she had stood at the window in the cold morning dark and watched a figure cross the stable yard and disappear through the side gate. She had not needed to see his face. She already knew the shape of what was happening. "Hargreaves has left the estate," Fletcher said before she could speak. "His room has been cleared. His personal effects are gone. None of the other staff saw him go." "Someone did," Elinor said. Fletcher looked at her. "Yes, we believe so. The groom on the early shift says he saw a man matching the description leave through the eastern gate on foot just before dawn. He didn't think to report it because he assumed it was a delivery." "People assume a great deal when they don't want to be involved," Elinor said. Fletcher was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The Duke is asking if you would come down before the other guests are up." "Yes," Elinor said. She had already known he would ask. She dressed quickly and without any particular attention to the result. She had learned, years ago, that spending time on appearance in moments that actually mattered was a way of using your hands to avoid using your mind, and she preferred to use her mind. She put on the gray dress, practical, dark enough not to show anything, light enough to move in, and she left her hair in the simple arrangement she had given it at 5 in the morning when she had first woken and known the night was over. Fletcher led her down a back staircase she had not been shown the previous evening, which confirmed that she was not being taken to a formal meeting room but to somewhere private. They went past the kitchens, which were already awake with the particular disciplined noise of a large house beginning its day, past a corridor hung with estate maps, and through a door that opened into a small study at the back of the ground floor. The window faced the garden. The morning light was the color of cold water. The Duke was already there. He was standing at the window with a cup of tea going cold in his hand, looking out at the garden in a way that suggested he was not seeing the garden at all. He was dressed, which told her he also had not slept, or had not slept much. He turned when she came in. "Miss Ashford," he said, "please sit down." "I'll stand," she said, and then caught herself and sat down because she was not in this room to be contrary. She was in this room because something serious had happened, and the man standing at the window had chosen to believe her about it before anyone else had, and that was worth the courtesy of sitting in a chair. The Duke looked at her for a moment. In the morning light, without the social occasion arranged around him, he looked different, not smaller, but more specific. The broad competence she had noticed the previous evening was still there, but there were lines around his eyes and a quality in the set of his shoulders that suggested a man who had spent the night carrying something. "Fletcher tells me," he said, "that you watched Hargreaves for nearly an hour before you moved." 11 minutes before I identified the concern," she said. "Then I watched for longer to confirm it." "What was it that you identified?" "His hands," she said, and a pause at the drinks table that was 3 seconds longer than it should have been, "and the way he positioned your glass after he returned it to the tray, separated from the others, marked." The Duke was quiet. He set the tea down on the desk beside him. "I've had Hargreaves in my employ for 4 years, he said. It was not a defense. It was a fact placed carefully, a man thinking through the implications of a thing rather than reacting to them. "That's likely the point," Elinor said. "Long enough to be trusted, long enough to know your routines." "You think this was planned?" "Yes." "For how long?" "I don't know," she said, "but the method suggests patience. Someone who planned this did not plan it in a week. They found a person with access, they gave that person time to become invisible, and they chose an occasion when the house was full enough that an incident could look accidental." The Duke looked at her steadily. "You know a great deal about this sort of thing." It was not an accusation. It was a question with its sharp edge filed down, which she recognized as a courtesy. She considered what to say. "I have had occasion to learn," she said. She kept her voice even and moved on before he could ask further. "The more important question is who sent him. Hargreaves was not acting alone. He didn't have the standing for it, and he didn't have a motive that I can see. Someone put him here. Someone is going to know that last night went wrong." "And they will try again," the Duke said. "Possibly, or they will wait, depending on how patient they are and how much they need this to succeed." Fletcher, who had been standing near the door with the quiet professional invisibility of a very good secretary, cleared his throat. "We sent a man after Hargreaves at first light." He was headed south on the main road. We'll know more by this afternoon. You won't find him, Elinor said. Both of them looked at her. I don't mean to be discouraging. I simply mean that whoever arranged this would have arranged an exit as well. He'll have been met somewhere, or he'll disappear in a town large enough to make disappearing easy. She paused. But you may find out who met him. That's more useful anyway. The Duke turned back to the window. Outside, a gardener had appeared on the far path, pushing a wheelbarrow with the unhurried purpose of a man with a full morning ahead of him. The autumn garden was brown and gold and still. It looked entirely peaceful and was apparently not. Fletcher, the Duke said. Would you give us a few minutes, please? Fletcher nodded and withdrew and closed the door quietly. The study felt different with just the two of them in it. Not uncomfortable. Elinor was not easily made uncomfortable, but denser, somehow, more specific. She was aware of the morning light and the cold tea and the Duke standing with his back to her, and she waited. I owe you an explanation, he said. You don't owe me anything, she said. He turned around. I said I believe you last night in front of a room full of people. He paused. I'd like you to understand that I didn't say it for the room. Elinor looked at him for a moment. There were several things she could say to this. She chose the accurate one, I know. Something shifted briefly in his expression, not quite surprise, but the adjustment a face makes when a conversation goes somewhere slightly unexpected. You know. You said it quietly, she said. If it were for the room, you would have said it differently, with more volume and less precision. He almost smiled, not quite. You observe a great deal. I observe everything, she said. It's a habit I developed under circumstances that made it necessary. I'm not telling you this to invite questions. I'm telling you because you should know the quality of information I'm offering you and where it comes from. There was a pause. The Duke crossed to the desk and sat on the edge of it, which was a less formal posture than she had expected from him, the posture of a man thinking rather than presiding. The creditor, he said. Elinor waited. There is a man, the Duke said slowly, as though he was deciding how much to say as he said it, by the name of Alderton. He holds a significant portion of debt on 2 estates in this county, not mine. I have been very careful to keep my finances independent of him, but he has been attempting for the past 18 months to bring me into an arrangement with him. The arrangement would benefit him considerably and would give me access to capital I don't need at terms I would never accept. He paused. I have declined multiple times. Politely and then less politely. And he is not accustomed to being declined, Elinor said. He is a man who has built a very comfortable position by being the kind of person other people find it easier to accommodate than to refuse, the Duke said. I suspect I have become a problem for him, not financially, not yet, but as a precedent. If a man of my standing refuses him publicly and continues to refuse him, others may find it easier to do the same. And that would cost him considerably more than a single deal. Yes, Elinor sat with this for a moment. The fire in the small grate was low but steady, and the light from the window had strengthened slightly as the morning moved forward. She could hear faintly the sounds of the house coming awake, doors, movement, the distant clatter of breakfast being arranged. What do you know about Alderton's other connections? She asked. He is well placed, the Duke said. He has spent 40 years making himself useful to people who matter, which means he has leverage and he has access and he has, I suspect, a very good sense of which stones to look under when he needs something done quietly. Like placing a footman, the Duke agreed. Elinor looked at the window. Then the footman is the least of your concerns, she said. Hargreaves was a single method. A man like Alderton, if he has decided you are a problem that needs resolving, will have other methods. I know, the Duke said. He said it without drama, which she appreciated, the calm of a man who has already reckoned with a difficult truth and is now focused on what to do about it. Will you tell anyone, she asked, the other guests? No, he said immediately. The fewer people who know, the fewer opportunities for the information to reach Alderton before I've decided how to proceed. That's wise, Elinor said. She paused. It also means you'll need to pretend that last night was simply a spilled glass. Which is what you told your Countess it was. Yes. He looked at her. You made a decision very quickly. I made it before I moved toward the table, she said. If something went wrong and it came out afterward, a clumsy accident is a story that holds. A deliberate intervention raises questions about how I knew, and questions about how I knew lead to questions I'm not prepared to answer in front of 40 strangers." The Duke was quiet for a moment, and in front of one person who isn't a stranger. Alina met his gaze. It was a clear question, carefully phrased, and she took it seriously. "I will tell you what is useful for you to know," she said, "and I will tell you honestly." "That's all I'd ask," he said. Outside, a bird landed on the garden wall and regarded the frost with what appeared to be personal affront, then departed. The Duke picked up his cold tea, looked at it, and set it back down. "Fletcher will have information this afternoon," he said. "I'd like you to be present when he reports." "I'm a companion to the Countess of Halford," Alina said, "which means my presence can reasonably be required anywhere the Countess goes, and the Countess, I anticipate, will not be in any hurry to leave Windmere Park. She is fond of your gardens and your cook." "The Countess is welcome to stay as long as she likes," the Duke said, "as are you." "Then I'll be available this afternoon," she said. She stood because there was nothing more to say yet, and she had learned the hard way that saying things after they were finished, just to fill space, was how you ended up giving away more than you intended. The Duke stood as well. He was, she noticed again, quite tall. She had noticed it the night before and was noticing it again now, which was more times than she usually noticed a thing. "Miss Ashford," he said as she moved toward the door, "why did you act last night? You were a guest, a companion to a guest. It would have been very easy to do nothing." Alina stopped and considered the question. It deserved a real answer, not a deflection. She turned back. "I have stood in a room," she said, "and watched something happen that I could have stopped, and I did not stop it because I was not certain and because I did not want to be wrong in front of people. And afterward I was right and it was too late." She paused. "I decided some time ago that I would rather be wrong in front of people, and alive with the embarrassment than right in private, and living with the alternative." The Duke looked at her for a long moment. She had no idea what he was reading in her face, and she was not entirely comfortable with not knowing. "Thank you," he said. He said it simply, as though he meant it and saw no need to ornament it. "You're welcome," she said, which was the only appropriate response, and she left the study and walked back through the corridor with the estate maps, past the kitchens, up the back stairs, and into the part of the house where the guests were beginning to appear for breakfast. She took a cup of tea from the sideboard and found a seat near the window and drank it slowly while the morning gathered itself around her. The Countess appeared eventually, full of energy and plans for the garden, and Alina agreed to everything the Countess suggested and heard none of it. She was thinking about Alderton, about a name she had not heard in several years but which had existed in the periphery of her former life, the way unpleasant things exist in peripheries, known but not acknowledged, there but not looked at directly. She was thinking about what it meant that this particular name had appeared again, in this particular context, at this particular estate. She was thinking that the thing she had believed, for the past 4 years, was safely in the past, might not be as safely past as she had arranged her life to suggest. By the time Fletcher appeared in the drawing room at 2:30 with a private message for the Duke, Alina had already worked out most of what he was going to say. She was right about all of it except one thing. The one thing she hadn't worked out, yet was going to change everything. The man Fletcher had sent after Hargreaves came back, with a thin piece of information that opened a thick door. Hargreaves had not gone south, as the groom reported. He had doubled back on the road, cut across the Northfield, and met a carriage on the lane beyond the mill, a private carriage, unmarked, waiting with a driver and no passengers, which meant it had been sent for him specifically, and the person who sent it had known exactly when to send it. The carriage had gone north. Their man had followed for 6 miles before losing it on the crossroads. Fletcher laid this out in the small study, the three of them arranged around the desk in the grey afternoon light, and Alina listened without interrupting. "North," she said when Fletcher finished. "North," he confirmed. "Alderton has a house in the north," the Duke said, 40 miles from here." "Is that where he is now?" Fletcher. "We believe so," Fletcher said. "He left London 8 days ago. There were no public announcements of his travels." Alina looked at the window. 8 days ago, which meant Alderton had known about the dinner gathering at least 8 days ago. He had positioned himself near enough to receive a report when the plan succeeded, and far enough not to be connected to it when the questions started. Except the plan had not succeeded. He'll know by now, she said, or he will by tonight. Yes, the Duke said. What will he do? The Duke and Fletcher exchanged a look, not a conspiratorial one, just the look of two people who had been working together long enough to share a shorthand. We don't know, the Duke said. That's what concerns me. I know what Alderton does when things go as planned. I don't know what he does when they don't. Elinor knew something about men who built plans in the dark and conducted their affairs through intermediaries and spent years making themselves untouchable. They did not accept a single failure as a final answer. They adjusted. They found another angle, and they were often, when moved to urgency, considerably more reckless than their usual careful methods would suggest. He will do something faster, she said. Whatever patience he had is going to be shorter now. He'll want this resolved before you have time to find out what happened. Then we have very little time, the Duke said. You have the time you decide to use well, Elinor said. She looked at him directly. What does Alderton actually need? Not what he wants, what does he need? If the goal is to bring you into an arrangement, then harming you directly doesn't achieve it. He needs you compliant. What makes a man like you compliant? The Duke sat back in his chair. The question was uncomfortable, and she knew it, and she asked it anyway because uncomfortable questions were frequently the only useful ones. Reputation, he said after a moment. If my reputation were damaged sufficiently, if there were a scandal that I could not publicly survive, my options would narrow considerably. A man in a weak position cannot afford to refuse powerful allies. And Alderton has the connections to manufacture a scandal. Yes. Elinor was quiet for a moment. She had a particular feeling when pieces of a situation began to arrange themselves into a pattern, not satisfaction exactly, more like the sensation of a lock giving way. Things she had known separately were beginning to connect. She thought of something she had not told either of them yet. She thought about whether to tell them now. She thought about what it would cost her if she did. The man behind Hargreaves, she said carefully. You said Alderton, but I'd like to know something. Before he approached you about this arrangement, before the last 18 months, had you ever had any dealings with him, or any dealings with anyone connected to him? The Duke shook his head. Not directly, not that I know of. And your estate, your finances, your family. My finances are entirely in order and have been for 20 years, he said. My family, my father died when I was 26, which is when I took the title. My mother lives in the south of France. I have a sister who is married to a perfectly adequate man in Dorset. He paused. Why are you asking? Because, Elinor said, I am trying to understand whether this is entirely about you. A silence. What do you mean? Fletcher asked. Elinor made a decision. She had made most of her significant decisions in the last 6 years with approximately the same amount of warning, a moment's assessment, the weight of what various options cost, and then a choice. She had not been wrong often. She had not been without cost often either. I have also encountered Alderton's name, she said, some years ago, in a different context and a different life. I am not ready to tell you the full details of that context because some of those details belong to other people and not to me to share. But I can tell you that the man operates in a way that is consistent with what you are describing. He uses people who are trusted. He moves through intermediaries. He is very good at remaining invisible while the consequences of his actions are entirely visible. She paused. And he has a habit, which I believe is a consistent one, of targeting people who know things he would prefer they didn't. The Duke watched her. His expression had the quality she was coming to associate with him, careful and steady, and giving nothing away before he had decided what to give. Do you know something about Alderton? He asked. I know something that may be connected to Alderton, she said. I am not yet certain, and until I am certain I would prefer not to present you with information I cannot stand behind. Fair enough, he said. Fletcher was quieter than he had been. He was writing something in a small notebook, which he did with the quick efficiency of a man who had learned that a detail missed in the moment was a detail gone permanently. What do you need? The Duke asked. Elinor looked at him. The question was direct and specific, and it cut through the polite distance of their acquaintance with a kind of efficiency she respected. He was not asking it to be kind. He was asking it because he was assessing what resources to deploy. I need access to your library, she said. Specifically any correspondence you have from the past 2 years with Alderton or anyone connected to him. And I need to know who else in this county he has financial arrangements with." "The library is yours," the Duke said immediately. "The correspondence Fletcher bring everything." "Yes," Fletcher said. "The county connections," the Duke continued. "I can give you the names I know of. There are others I suspect but can't confirm. Between the two lists, you'll have a start." "That's enough to begin," Elinor said. She rose, the Duke rose as well, which she had noticed he did, a courtesy that was simply habit for him, the automatic manners of a man who had been taught them young enough that they were genuine rather than performed. "Miss Ashford," he said, "be careful." She almost said, "I am always careful," but that was not precisely true. She was not always careful. She was often careful and occasionally something else that got results that careful could not get, and she had learned to know the difference. "I'll start in the library," she said. She left the study and went down the corridor and found the library at the end of the east wing, and she went in, and she closed the door, and she stood for a moment in the particular hush that only very large rooms full of books have, a hush that absorbs everything and judges nothing. Then she went to work. The afternoon light moved across the library floor while Elinor read through correspondence, made notes in the small book she carried always in her coat pocket, and built piece by piece, name by name, a map of what Alderton touched and how far his reach extended. It was further than even the Duke had estimated. And somewhere in the map, in a corner she had not yet fully seen, there was a shape that looked very much like it included her. The three words sat in her like a stone in still water. Elinor was practical about most things. She was practical about her own heart, which she had decided at some point in the last 6 years to treat as a navigational instrument rather than a feeling useful when it gave her information, to be managed carefully when it attempted to give her something else. She was practical about the people she met, whom she assessed with the same quiet efficiency she applied to rooms and wine glasses and footmen with still hands. She was not, apparently, entirely practical about "I believe you." She found herself in the library at 4:30, having read the same letter from Alderton to the Duke 3 times without taking in a single sentence, and she put the letter down on the desk and looked at the far wall and said to herself, very firmly, in the internal voice she reserved for instructions to herself, "Stop it." She picked up the letter again. Alderton's correspondence, when she finally read it properly, was the work of a very careful man. It said almost nothing directly, it suggested, it implied. It operated in the space between what words actually said and what they were clearly intended to convey, the language of a man who had spent decades communicating things that could not be committed to paper and had become expert at writing in the gap. Anyone reading this correspondence who did not know what to look for would see polite business letters, invitations to discuss arrangements, expressions of respect and goodwill. The occasional subtle indication that such goodwill was, naturally, conditional. Elinor knew what to look for. She had encountered this particular style of communication before, in letters that had belonged to someone she loved, and that she had read without permission, because the alternative was not reading them, and she had already decided that she was not going to make that choice again. She sorted the letters into 3 categories, the ones that told her about Alderton's methods, the ones that told her about his specific intentions regarding the Duke, and the one letter, tucked between 2 others as though placed there intentionally to be overlooked, that told her something she had not been expecting. That last letter was not from Alderton. It was from a solicitor in London, writing on behalf of an unnamed client, inquiring with polite legal precision about a person described only as a lady formerly known in certain London circles, presently employed in a companion capacity, whose history may be of interest to parties wishing to establish certain facts about events occurring in the winter of 1881. The winter of 1881. Elinor set that letter down, very carefully, the way you set down something you have picked up without realizing it was sharp. She sat for a moment with her hands flat on the desk. Then she picked the letter back up and read it again, because she needed to be absolutely certain of what it said, and she needed to know if there was anything in it she had missed the first time. There was not. It was what it appeared to be, someone looking for her, describing her with enough accuracy to make the anonymity essentially useless, making inquiries through legal channels with just enough formal distance to make direct accusation impossible. The winter of 1881 was the year she did not speak about. She had not known, until this moment, that anyone outside of a very small number of people knew that there was anything about it to speak about. She put the letter in her coat pocket. This was, strictly speaking, removing it from the Duke's correspondence without permission, and she was entirely at peace with this. There were some pieces of information that required careful management before they could be shared, and this was one of them. She would tell him. She would tell him everything, eventually, but she needed to understand it herself first, and she needed to understand it alone, because it involved things that were hers before they were relevant to anyone else. She stood, straightened the remaining correspondence, and went to find Fletcher. Fletcher was in the corridor outside the Duke's study with a cup of tea, and the expression of a man who had managed 3 separate problems in the last hour, and had not mentioned any of them. "Where is the Duke?" she asked. "He's with the Countess of Halford and 3 other guests in the south drawing-room," Fletcher said. "They're having tea. He's been there for an hour." "Being normal," Elinor said. "Being very normal," Fletcher agreed. There was a trace of something in his voice, admiration, she thought, or its functional equivalent. A man who could sit at a social tea after the morning they had all had and perform effortless normality was not someone who had learned that skill casually. "Can you get a message to him without it being obvious?" Fletcher looked at her. "Yes, what do you need him to know?" Elinor considered. "Tell him that there is a document in the correspondence that pertains to a third party not previously discussed. Tell him I need half an hour this evening, privately." Fletcher nodded. He did not ask what the document said, which she appreciated. She went back to the library and spent the remaining afternoon making careful notes. She built on 4 pages of the Duke's writing paper. She would explain the borrowing later, a complete map of what she knew about Alderton, what she had now confirmed from the correspondence, and what the presence of that letter implied. It implied several things, none of them comfortable, and she sat with each one carefully and assigned it the weight it actually deserved rather than the weight she preferred it to have. The guests of Windermere Park dined that evening in the high-ceilinged dining room with its 30 candles and its long table, and Elinor sat near the middle of the table this time. The Countess had arranged a different placement, and she ate what was put in front of her and spoke to the people beside her in a way that was perfectly adequate and used approximately 7% of her actual attention. The rest of her attention was on the Duke. He sat at the head of the table and conducted the dinner with the same composed ease he had conducted the previous evening, conversation moving through him like a current, guests addressed, topics navigated, a glass raised at the appropriate moment. He did not look at Elinor. She had now counted precisely the number of times he had deliberately not looked at her since this morning, 11, which was, she observed with the part of her that was always observing, exactly the right number. If he had not looked at all, it would have been studied. If he had looked too often, it would have been obvious. 11 was the count of a man who was paying attention to how much he was paying attention. She found this precise and rather impressive. She also found it, and this was the part she was being practical about, quite difficult to look away from. After dinner, the guests scattered to their various evening occupations, and Elinor excused herself from the Countess on the grounds of a headache, which the Countess received with sympathy and suggestions involving lavender, and Elinor thanked her for both and went upstairs. She did not go to her room. She went to the corridor Fletcher had shown her, the one with the estate maps, and she waited. He was there in 8 minutes. The Duke came without Fletcher, which she had not expected and which told her something. He looked at her in the corridor with the same direct quality he had in the morning, the quality of a person who had decided to see clearly and was doing so. "What did you find?" he asked. She handed him the letter. She watched his face as he read it. She was very good at reading faces, and she read his carefully and noted 3 things. First, that he understood immediately what the letter's inquiry meant. Second, that the part of his face he did not control, the area near his eyes, registered something that was not anger but was adjacent to it. Third, that he kept it extremely still and looked at her when he finished reading. "This inquiry was placed through a solicitor who does work for Alderton," he said. "Yes, it's the same firm on 3 other letters in the correspondence. The name at the bottom is different, but the firm's address is consistent. And the woman described in this letter," he said, and he looked at her with complete directness, "is you." "Yes," she said. He was quiet. She had thought beforehand about how he would take this, about whether he would ask immediately, or whether he would do what most people did, which was to address the practical elements first as a way of buying time for the more complicated question. She had given him approximately a 60% chance of asking immediately. "The winter of 1881, he said. He did not say it as a question. He said it as someone making a place in a sentence for information they were inviting. "I will tell you," she said. "I will tell you everything that is relevant, but I need to ask you something first." "All right," he said. "Do you know," she said carefully, "whether Alderton and a man named Clifford Hale have ever had dealings with each other?" The Duke's expression changed. Not dramatically, it was a small shift, the kind that a face makes when something lands somewhere unexpected. He was quiet for a moment. "Where did you hear that name?" he asked. "I didn't hear it here," she said. "I brought it with me. Clifford Hale was my husband." The silence in the corridor was very complete. The estate maps on the walls seemed to lean in slightly. "Clifford Hale died in 1882, the Duke said slowly. "I know this because he had dealings with two of my neighboring estates, and his death caused some financial complications that took months to untangle. I never met him personally. I know him by reputation only." He paused. "His death was ruled an accident." "Yes," Elinor said, "it was." Another silence. "You don't believe it was," he said. "No," she said. "I don't believe it was." The Duke looked at the letter in his hand, then at her, and she watched him put things together the way an intelligent person puts things together when given the right pieces, not performing the connection, just making it solidly and quickly. "And you believe Alderton was connected to it," he said. "I believe Alderton was connected to Clifford," she said. "The nature of that connection, whether it extends to what happened in 1882, is what I have not been able to establish. Until now I had no way in, no angle of approach, no one willing to speak to me, and no documentation that could be traced." She paused. "Your correspondence is the first documentation I have seen that places Alderton in the same world as the name I have been carrying." The Duke looked at her. She had not said this to anyone. She had carried it in the part of herself she did not open, and she had arranged her entire life since 1882 around the particular discipline of carrying it without showing it, and continuing to function with it inside her the way a body continues to function around an old wound that has healed over but never disappeared. It felt strange to say it. It felt strange to say it to him specifically, to this man she had met 36 hours ago, who had held her hand and said 3 words, and whose correspondence had just handed her the first thread of something she had been searching for, in one form or another, for 4 years. "I see," he said. He said it quietly and completely, the way people say things when they mean them entirely. "Then I'm very sorry." She had prepared for questions. She had prepared for practical responses, the next step, the plan, what to do with the information. She had not prepared for that, said that simply, meaning that completely. Her jaw tightened very slightly. She controlled it. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was even. He looked at her for a moment longer, and she looked back at him, and the corridor with its estate maps and its cold stone floor held them both very still for one long breath. "Then we are not only protecting my interests," he said. "We are working on something that is yours as well." "We don't need to frame it that way," she said. "I know we don't need to," he said. "I want to." Elinor was practical. She was always practical. She had built her practicality into a discipline and a defense, and a way of moving through the world that had served her extremely well in very difficult circumstances. She was not, at this exact moment, able to be entirely practical about Adrian Cavendish. She filed this information with the rest of the things she was not able to deal with right now, and she smoothed her face, and she said, "Then here is what I think we should do." And she told him. And he listened, and he asked 2 sharp questions, and he agreed to the plan, and they parted in the corridor and went to their separate rooms, and the house settled into its night sounds around them. Elinor lay awake for a long time. She thought about 1882, she thought about Clifford and about the things she had seen and the things she had not been able to prove. She thought about Alderton, who was 40 miles north in a house she had never been in, and who had sent a letter looking for her, and who did not yet know that she had found it. She thought about 3 words said in a room full of people, and the weight of them, and how impossible it was to be completely practical about impossible things. Eventually she slept. Outside, the autumn wind had picked up, and somewhere to the north, 40 miles away, A man named Alderton was reading a report that had reached him by messenger, and he was learning that the plan had failed. And he was already thinking about what came next. The next morning brought two things: a frost that had arrived overnight and turned the garden into something cold and silver, and a visitor. The visitor was not announced in advance. He arrived at 9 in the morning in a private carriage that bore no crest and was driven by a man who kept his hat low against the wind. Fletcher came to find Alina at breakfast. She was the only one in the breakfast room, the other guests being later risers, and he said quietly near her ear, "There is a man asking to see the Duke. He won't give his name to the footman at the door. He says only that he has information about a matter the Duke would wish to know urgently." Alina put down her toast. "How old is he?" "Mid-50s, Fletcher said, grey hair, well-dressed but not expensively, the kind of dress that is careful not to be noticed." "Is the Duke awake?" "He's been up since 6. "Take the visitor to the small study," she said. "Tell the Duke I would like to be present." Fletcher looked at her for precisely 1 second, the look of a man assessing whether this was appropriate and deciding rapidly that it was, and then nodded and went. Alina drank the rest of her tea, which was still hot, and then went to the small study. The visitor was already there. He stood near the window, which was the position she would have chosen, back to the wall, view of the door, maximum information about who was coming in before they arrived. He turned when she entered and looked at her with the careful eyes of a man who had learned to assess people in a glance, and was doing so now. He was not what she had expected. She had expected someone sent by Alderton, a threat dressed in courtesy, another intermediary. This man did not have that quality. He had the quality of someone who was frightened and was managing it with a professional discipline that was not quite adequate. "Miss," he said. "Yes," she said, "the Duke will be here in a moment. You can speak in front of me." He hesitated. "I was told to speak to the Duke personally." "And you will," she said. "I am assisting him with a private matter. You may decide whether your information is relevant enough to wait for a private audience, which may not be possible today given the number of guests in the house, or whether you trust the Duke's judgment about who is present." The man considered this. He had the look of someone making a calculation they hadn't planned on making. The Duke came in 30 seconds later. He looked at the man, then at Alina, and then back at the man, and he said, "Please sit down." The man sat. Alina remained standing near the wall, which was where she preferred to be. "My name is Graves," the man said. "I was formerly a clerk with the firm of Whitmore and Associates in London." Alina knew that name. She knew it because it was the firm whose address appeared at the bottom of 3 letters in the Duke's correspondence, including the letter now resting in her coat pocket. "Formerly," the Duke said. "I left their employ 3 weeks ago," Graves said. "I left because I became aware that certain work being conducted through the firm, work that I had been involved in a clerical capacity, had moved beyond what I was willing to be part of." "What work?" the Duke asked. Graves was quiet for a moment. Alina watched his hands. They were clasped on the table in front of him, not with the tight grip of concealed action but with the pressure of a man holding himself together. She adjusted her assessment of him. He was not an adversary, he was a source. "I prepared several letters," Graves said slowly. "Letters making inquiries on behalf of a client I knew only as a reference number in the firm's books. The inquiries were about a number of individuals. Some were about financial matters, debt positions, asset holdings, that sort of thing, but some were different. The more recent ones were inquiries about personal history, private history, the kind of information that is not in any public record but that exists in the memories of people who were present at certain events." "And you are here because," the Duke said. "Because one of those inquiries was about a former resident of this county," Graves said, "and I traced the reference number to a client named Alderton. And I knew Alderton's name because I had seen it in connection with something that troubled me considerably years before. And I decided," he stopped. He took a breath. "I decided that I was not able to continue participating in something I could see was going to end badly for people who had not done anything to deserve it." Alina heard the word "former resident" and felt something move in her chest, not fear, but the close relative of fear, the sensation that arrives when something you have been managing carefully from a distance is suddenly very nearby. "What was the inquiry about?" she asked. Her voice was perfectly level. Graves looked at her. About a woman, he said, a woman who had been married to a man called Clifford Hale. The inquiry was trying to establish her current whereabouts and whether she possessed or had knowledge of certain documents pertaining to Hale's financial activities in the year before his death. The small study was very quiet. Eleanor was aware of the Duke's eyes on her. She did not look at him. She kept her gaze on Graves, who was watching her with the careful neutrality of a man who had been professionally observing reactions for a long time. "And did the inquiry succeed?" she asked. "I don't know," Graves said. "I left before the response came back, but I know it was sent to an address in this county and I know the woman's name." He paused. "I know your name, Miss Ashford." There was another silence. "Then why are you telling me?" Eleanor said. "If Alderton sent the inquiry, you work for Alderton. Coming here is not in your professional interest." "I told you," Graves said, "I left." "People don't simply leave men like Alderton," she said, "not without considerable cost and considerable reason." Graves looked at his clasped hands. Then he looked up, and for the first time his face showed what was underneath the careful professional exterior, and what was underneath was the look of a man who has done something he cannot undo and is trying, in whatever remaining way is available to him, to do something better. "I had a daughter," he said. "She died 3 years ago. The circumstances of her death were connected, in ways I have only recently understood, to a situation that Alderton arranged. She was not the intended consequence. She was in the way of something he needed done, and she was removed from that position, and it was made to look like something it was not." He stopped. "I did not know when I first took employment at the firm what kind of work was done there. By the time I understood, I had already been made part of it in small enough ways that leaving would have cost me everything. I stayed. I am not proud of having stayed." Another pause. "When I saw the inquiry about Miss Ashford, about a woman whose husband died in circumstances I recognized, I decided that I had waited long enough to cost myself something." Eleanor looked at this man for a long moment. She thought about what it cost people to decide late, to do the thing they should have done earlier. She had a particular understanding of this. She had lived with her own version of it, the moment she had not moved, the word she had not said, and she understood the weight of it in a way that was not abstract. "What do you have?" she asked. "What did you bring with you?" Graves reached into his coat and produced a folded bundle of papers. He placed them on the desk. "Copies," he said, "of the correspondence I handled, the reference numbers, the dates, the substance of the inquiries, a record of payments from the client account to various individuals over the past 4 years. Some of those individuals I can identify, some I cannot, but there is enough here to establish a pattern." The Duke reached for the papers. Eleanor watched him read the top sheet. His face did not change, but his hands went very still, the stillness of a person who has found something they needed, and is taking a moment to understand what it costs. "This is significant," he said quietly. "Yes," Graves said. "Are you safe?" Eleanor asked. Graves looked at her. "Probably not," he said, with the calm of someone who has already made peace with this. "But I am here and you have the papers, and that is what I came to do." He stood, the Duke stood as well and offered his hand, and Graves shook it with the brief grip of a man completing a transaction. "Fletcher will arrange somewhere for you to stay," the Duke said. "Not at the house, somewhere quiet." "I don't need." "You do," the Duke said without heat. "Whatever your reasons for coming here, you have made yourself useful to me and potentially visible to Alderton. I'm not going to send you back out on the road without a plan." Graves looked at him for a moment with an expression that was something close to relief, which was a thing Eleanor recognized because she had felt it in this house herself, once recently, when a man said 3 words. Fletcher took Graves out, the door closed. Eleanor crossed to the desk and looked at the papers the Duke was still holding. "This is evidence," she said. "Yes," the Duke said, "of Alderton's methods, of the inquiries. If even half of what Graves says is accurate, this connects Alderton to a pattern of conduct that no respectable person could ignore." He paused. "It still doesn't connect him directly to your husband's death." "No," Eleanor said, "not yet." She looked at the papers. "But it connects him to you and to me and to Clifford's finances, which means the pattern is there even if the final piece isn't." "What is the final piece?" the Duke asked. Eleanor thought about the winter of 1881. She thought about what she had seen and what she had found afterward and where she had put it. I know where it is, she said. I have always known where it is. I was waiting until I had enough around it to make it matter. And now, she looked at the papers, she looked at him. Now I think we have enough around it, she said. I need to write a letter, and then I need to go somewhere. Where? London, she said. There is something there that I left in the keeping of someone I trust. It has been there for 4 years. I think it's time to bring it back. The Duke was quiet for a moment, then he said, I'm coming with you. Elena opened her mouth to say no. She had several very good reasons for no. She had reasons that were practical and reasons that were cautious and reasons that she did not examine too closely because they lived in the same part of her that was being impractical about him. She said, all right. Outside, the frost was beginning to melt in the thin autumn sun, and the garden was dripping quietly, and 40 miles to the north, Alderton was learning, from a different messenger, that a man named Graves had left London 3 days ago with something that did not belong to him. Things were accelerating. Elena had always worked best at speed. They left before the other guests were awake. It was Fletcher's suggestion, which Elena considered the most practical idea she had heard in 2 days. The other guests at Windermere Park were not threats individually. They were the ordinary collection of neighbors and associates that such a gathering always produced, but a duke departing suddenly in an unmarked carriage at 7 in the morning was exactly the kind of thing that became conversation by noon and reached the wrong ears by nightfall. Fletcher had a story prepared for the housekeeper who would tell the guests. Urgent estate business in the north, back in 3 days, the house and guests were to be accommodated with every comfort. North, when they were going south. Your secretary is quite good at lying, Elena said, as the carriage moved down the long drive and the house retreated behind them. He's quite good at protecting, the Duke said from across the seat. There's a difference. Is there? A lie is about obscuring something, he said. A misdirection is about making sure the wrong people look in the wrong direction while the right people do what needs to be done. Fletcher has a very clear sense of which is which. Elena considered this. Outside, the last of the estate oaks were passing, and the road was opening into the broader autumn countryside, grey sky, brown fields, the occasional hedgerow still holding its color against the general surrender to season. You trust him completely, she said. Completely, the Duke agreed. That's rare. He looked at her. Do you have anyone you trust completely? She thought about it honestly. One person, she said. In London, she's the one who has been keeping what I need to collect. Who is she? Her name is Clara, Elena said. She was my companion in the years when I was in a position to have a companion. After everything fell apart, she refused to leave my service, even when I could no longer pay her anything resembling a proper wage. We came to an arrangement. She lives in a small house in Kensington that technically belongs to what remains of my former financial situation, and in exchange, she has agreed to hold certain things in trust for me without asking what they are. And she hasn't asked. She has asked, Elena said, repeatedly, but she has also agreed to wait for the answer, which is more useful than getting one too early. The Duke was quiet for a moment. The carriage moved steadily south. He had insisted on the unmarked carriage and 2 outriders instead of one, and he had a bag with him that Elena suspected contained more practical items than a 2-day social trip usually required. He had also, she noticed, changed out of the formal clothing he wore at the house into something considerably more practical, dark, plain, the kind of clothes that moved easily and drew no particular attention. She had been wearing her practical gray for 2 days. She had not had occasion to feel self-conscious about it until she was sitting across from him in a carriage and noticing the quality of his coat. What is it that Clara is keeping? He asked. Letters, she said, a specific set of letters, between Clifford and a man I did not know at the time but whose name I now recognize. She paused. The letters make it clear that Clifford's financial position in the months before his death was not what it appeared to be. He was not simply in debt. He had entered into an arrangement that required him to do something, I don't know exactly what, because the letters are careful, and when he attempted to withdraw from the arrangement, there were consequences. And Alderton's name is in these letters. No, she said, that's the problem. The name in the letters is an intermediary, but the intermediary is on the list Fletcher found in Graves's papers. He appears in Alderton's payment records 4 years ago, 6 months before Clifford died. The Duke absorbed this. That's a chain, he said, not direct proof. No, she said, but chains are what we have, and this chain has enough links that someone with the right standing to present it in the right room would be able to do something with it. Someone like a duke, he said. Someone exactly like a duke, she said. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, something more restrained and more genuine than a smile. She noted it the way she was beginning to note everything about him, the particular economy of his expressions, the way he thought through things without narrating the thinking, the quality of his attention when he was listening, which was complete and undivided and made you feel, for the duration, that you were the only important thing in his field of vision. She was being extremely practical about all of this. "Tell me about Clifford Hale," he said. Elinor looked out the window. The question was not unexpected. She had known it was coming since the morning in the corridor when she had said his name and watched the Duke put things together. She had been deciding, in the part of her mind that was always deciding things, exactly how much to say and in what order. "He was 15 years older than me," she said. "I was 22 when we married. He was handsome and charming and very well connected, and he told me he loved me, which I believed because I was 22, and I did not yet know that there is a category of person who says things they do not mean with a fluency that makes it entirely convincing." "Did he love you?" "I think he was fond of me," she said, "in the way a person is fond of something that is useful and pleasing and not particularly complicated. But love, the kind that means you actually see the other person, that you care what happens to them independently of what it costs you, no, I don't think so." She said this without self-pity, because she had long since passed the stage where this particular truth had the power to injure her. It had the quality now of a historical fact, accurate, recorded, belonging to a period that was over. "And when you realized this," the Duke said. "I realized it gradually," she said, "and then in the winter of 1881 I realized it all at once. I found the letters I mentioned. Not because I was looking for a receipt for a household bill that had gone missing, which is precisely the sort of prosaic errand that turns life over entirely. The letters were in a box in the study. I read enough to understand what they were about, and then I stopped reading, because I had understood enough and because I was frightened." "What did you do?" "I said nothing," she said, "which is the thing I have not forgiven myself for if I'm honest. I said nothing, and I put the letters back and I took copies of the most important ones. I was not so frightened that I lost my sense of what evidence was, and I gave those copies to Clara for safekeeping. And then I spent 3 months trying to decide what to do. And then he died." "And then he died," she said, "in February of 1882. He fell from a horse, which he had ridden 100 times on a road he knew well on a dry winter morning. The horse came back without him. They found him 2 hours later." She was looking at the window and the road and the gray sky, and she was not, she noticed, actually seeing any of it. She was seeing the morning in 1882 when 2 men had come to the door of the house in London with their careful faces and their careful words. "And you believed it was not an accident," the Duke said. "I believed it was not an accident because I knew what the letters contained, and I knew he had been trying to exit an arrangement that someone powerful needed him to stay in. And I believed it because of the way the men who came to tell me looked when they told me not sorry, not present, not there in the way that people are there when they tell you something true and difficult. They were delivering a message. That's a different quality entirely." "Did you tell anyone?" "I told a solicitor," she said, "who told me that grief made people see things that were not there, which was both condescending and professionally useless, so I dismissed him. I told a man at the Home Office who had been a friend of Clifford's, who listened to me with a great deal of politeness and then did absolutely nothing. I told 2 more people. No one acted." She stopped. She was aware that her voice had remained even throughout this recounting, which was a thing she had worked on specifically, because she knew this story existed in her and would eventually need to be said, and she had practiced the evenness of it in private so that, when it was required in public, she would not embarrass herself. "And then," the Duke asked. "And then the estate was settled," she said. "What remained of Clifford's finances, which was considerably less than what should have remained, because the arrangement he had been in had eaten a great deal of it, was managed by an executor who was, in retrospect, also not what he appeared to be. I received what I received, which was enough to be stable but not enough to be independent. I found employment as the Countess of Halford's companion, which suited me because it allowed me to move through houses and rooms without being the person anyone was watching. And I spent the last 4 years doing exactly what I told you earlier, watching. Watching for Alderton, the Duke said. Watching for anything, she said, a name, a connection. A letter tucked between other letters in a correspondence file. She looked at him, like the one I found yesterday. The Duke looked at her for a long moment. He had the particular look he sometimes had, steady, direct, the look of a person who had set down whatever they were carrying in order to be fully present for what they were hearing. You have been doing this alone, he said, for 4 years. Yes. And no one has helped you. No one has known about it, she said, except Clara, who knows there are letters but doesn't know what they mean, and now you. Silence, except for the sound of the carriage and the horses and the wind against the window. I would like to help, he said. She had expected this. She had been expecting it since the morning in the study when he had said, I believe you, to a woman who had introduced herself to him less than 12 hours earlier by spilling his wine. He was, she had assessed, a man who moved quickly on things he was certain of. You are already helping, she said. I mean with more than the carriage and the correspondence file, he said. I mean properly, with everything I have, which is a considerable amount. She looked at him. This may cost you something, she said. If Alderton is what I think he is, confronting him will not be clean or quick. He has 40 years of carefully built position behind him. He has connections into places that powerful people don't usually reach willingly. Moving against him will make you an enemy of a man who has proven he is comfortable making things happen without being seen to make them happen. I know, the Duke said. You know, she said, but you should know it with the full weight of what it means, not as an abstract risk, as a specific one. I understand specific risks, he said. I've been managing them since I was 26. He paused. What I don't understand, and what I find considerably more uncomfortable, is the idea of understanding a specific risk and deciding it is easier to let someone else carry it. Elena looked at him. She had spent 4 years being careful not to depend on anyone. She had structured her entire life around the principle that the only person she could rely on was herself, because she had tried other arrangements and they had failed at considerable cost. She had been right to do this. She was sure she had been right to do this. She was also aware that the principal was beginning to feel, sitting in this carriage in the October morning with this specific person, like a very old coat, still serviceable, but heavy. All right, she said, then here is what we are dealing with. She laid it out, all of it, the pieces she had not said yet, the connections she had mapped in the library, the implications of Graves's papers. She spoke clearly and without decoration, and she watched him listen. He listened the way she was coming to understand. He did everything, completely, with the full weight of his attention, asking no questions until she was finished. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, we'll need 3 things, the letters from Clara, a man I know in London who has connections inside the Home Office that are rather more useful than whoever you spoke to 4 years ago. And time, not much, but enough to build what we have into something that cannot be dismissed. How much time, she said. 2 weeks, he said, maybe less. And if Alderton moves before 2 weeks? Then we move faster, the Duke said. We're not the only ones on a clock, he is too. He knows Graves has taken something, he knows something went wrong at the house. He has less time than he thinks he does, and he doesn't yet know that. Elena considered this. It was an accurate reading of the situation. She had come to the same conclusion in the library. You're not what I expected, she said. What did you expect? A duke, she said, which was not quite an answer and was entirely the truth. He looked at her with that expression she was not being practical about, and he said nothing, and she looked away, and the carriage went south toward London through the grey October morning, carrying between them everything that had been said and everything that had not. The city appeared on the horizon hours later, the way cities always appeared, gradually and then all at once, the smoke and the spires and the noise and the particular press of a million lives conducting themselves in too small a space. Elena felt it the way she always felt it, the quickening that London produced in her, the sense of scale and possibility and danger that cities made possible. She sat forward. They were nearly there. Clara did not know they were coming. Elena had not been able to send word ahead without the word potentially reaching the wrong ears. and she had decided that an unannounced arrival was safer than a prepared one. Clara would answer the door, and she would see Alina, and she would understand immediately that whatever she had been holding in trust for 4 years was about to be retrieved. Clara was the only person in the world Alina fully trusted. She was also the only person who would not, for one single moment, look at the Duke of Windermere arriving on the doorstep and fail to have an opinion about it. Alina decided this was a problem for the moment it arrived. The carriage turned into the Kensington streets, and she watched the familiar facades go by, and she breathed evenly, and she thought about the letters, and about what they contained, and about how, for the first time in 4 years, she was going to lay them down in front of someone who had both the willingness to believe her and the standing to do something about it. 3 words had started this. She was beginning to think they might end it too. Clara opened the door before Alina could knock. This was not unusual. Clara had always had the particular instinct of a woman who paid attention, the kind of attention that registered carriage wheels on a familiar street, and put together the sound of them with the time of day and the context of the week, and arrived at the door prepared. She was perhaps 60, small and straight-backed, with grey hair kept in a severe arrangement that she had maintained through 20 years of changes in fashion, with the calm indifference of a woman who had more important things to think about. She looked at Alina for one long moment, then she looked at the man who had stepped out of the carriage behind Alina, then she looked back at Alina. "You'd better come in," Clara said. Her tone had the quality of a woman who had several questions, and had decided provisionally to ask none of them yet. The house inside was small and precisely ordered, the kind of order that comes not from excess, but from making very deliberate use of limited space. It smelled of tea and old wood and the particular paper smell of books that have been read many times. Alina had not been here in 6 months. The last time she had come, she had sat in the front parlor for an hour and drunk tea and not said what she needed to say, and Clara had let her not say it, which was one of the things that made Clara indispensable. "I need the box," Alina said, when they were inside with the door closed. Clara looked at her. "Now." "Yes, now." Clara looked at the Duke, then back at Alina, "And this gentleman?" "Adrian Cavendish," the Duke said, stepping forward. "I am trying to help Miss Ashford with something rather urgent. I apologize for arriving without notice." Clara received this with the expression of a woman doing mathematics. "The Duke of Windermere," she said. It was not a question. She had apparently recognized his name without requiring an introduction to do so. "Yes," he said. Clara looked at Alina. Alina looked back at Clara and said nothing, which was a form of communication between the two of them that contained a great deal of content. Clara absorbed it. "I'll get the box," she said. She went upstairs. The Duke looked at Alina. "She knew who I was." "Clara reads everything," Alina said. "The papers, the journals, the society notices. She considers it professionally useful." "She is your companion." "She is my friend," Alina said. "She is also the most competent person I have met in 40 years of meeting people, which is saying something." The Duke looked as though he intended to say something to this. Clara came back down the stairs before he could, carrying a flat wooden box that had the look of something that had been put somewhere safe a long time ago and had been waiting there with patient reliability ever since. She handed it to Alina. "I'd like to know what's in it," Clara said, eventually. "I know," Alina said. "Sit down, I'll tell you now." So she told her. Not everything, there were parts of the last 3 days that belonged to a conversation that wasn't Clara's yet, but the relevant shape of it. Clifford, the letters, the copy she had made, the connection to Alderton Graves, the Duke. Clara listened with her hands folded in her lap and her face very still, in the way of a person who has suspected something for a long time, and is now having the suspicion confirmed, and is deciding what to do with the confirmation. When Alina finished, Clara was quiet for a moment. "I always thought it was not an accident," she said. "I didn't know what it was, but I knew it was not what they said it was." "I know," Alina said. "You didn't tell me," Clara said, not accusing, factual. "I know," Alina said again. "I'm telling you now." Clara looked at the Duke. "And you're going to do something with this?" "Yes," the Duke said. "What?" Clara said. She had the particular directness of a woman who had spent decades answering to less competent people, and had decided that directness was the only honest response to incompetence. The Duke did not appear to find this off-putting. We are going to build a complete picture of Alderton's conduct, using the letters and the documents from Graves and the connections I can establish through my own contacts. We are going to present that picture to someone who cannot dismiss it because of who we are and what we have, and we are going to do it before Alderton has time to move against either of us. Against Elinor, you mean? Clara said. Against both of us now, the Duke said. I appear to have made myself part of this. Appear to have, Clara said, with the precise neutrality of a woman who was assessing a situation and had reached a conclusion but was reserving the final version of it. Elinor opened the box. Inside, under a layer of folded cloth, were the letters, exactly as she had left them. 6 letters copied in her own handwriting on plain paper, the originals having burned in the fire in the house on the night after Clifford's funeral, which was the only thing she had done in those weeks that she did not now question. The originals had needed to not exist. The copies needed to exist. She had managed both. She lifted them out and looked at them. They had the quality of things she had looked at before many times in her mind, and not for a long time with her actual eyes, and looking at them with her actual eyes was different, more specific, more real. She handed them to the Duke. He read carefully, slowly, with the focused attention of a man for whom reading carefully was not a performance but a practice. He went through all 6, and then went back and read 2 of them again, and then looked up at Elinor. The intermediary's name, he said. Bernard Oakes, she said. He appears in Graves's payment records 4 times, payments from Alderton's account. The most recent one is dated 2 months before Clifford's death. I know the name Oakes, the Duke said. Elinor's attention sharpened. From where? He worked for Alderton directly for some years. He moved to a position with a firm in Bristol about 5 years ago. We have documentation of at least 2 payments to him in the last year. He paused. He is still alive. The room was very quiet. He could testify, Clara said. He would need a considerable reason to testify, the Duke said carefully. A man in his position, who has been doing the kind of work these letters suggest for 40 years, does not simply decide to speak. He needs to believe that the cost of silence is higher than the cost of speaking. Elinor thought about this. Can you make that calculation change for him? I can make the environment around him change considerably, the Duke said. If Graves's documentation reaches the right hands, Oak's position becomes considerably less comfortable than it has been. He paused. I know a man, his name is Carlyle. He is in the Home Office, who is not the kind of man you spoke to 4 years ago. He is the kind of man who will look at what we have and understand what it means and act on it. How certain are you of him? Elinor asked. As certain as I am of Fletcher, he said, which I realize I said means completely. Elinor looked at the letters in his hands. She looked at the box. She looked at Clara, who was watching the proceedings with the expression of a woman filing everything she was observing for later careful review. Then we go to Carlisle, Elinor said. Tomorrow morning, the Duke said. Tonight we stay in London. I have a house in Mayfair. Fletcher has people there who can arrange rooms. Clara made a very small sound that was not quite a cough. Elinor looked at her. Clara's expression was perfectly neutral, which was the expression Clara wore when she was having a strong opinion that she had decided, for the moment, not to share. Clara, Elinor said. Yes, separate rooms. I didn't say anything, Clara said. You were about to. I was going to offer tea, Clara said, with an entirely straight face. The Duke looked from one to the other of them and then looked back at the letters, which was, Elinor thought, exactly the right response. Clara made tea. Elinor sat across from the Duke at the small parlor table and they went through the letters together, and he asked precise questions and she answered them. And they built, piece by piece, the case that she had been carrying alone for 4 years and that was beginning, for the first time, to feel like something that someone else could hold as well. Outside the small Kensington window, London went about its business, entirely indifferent. The evening was coming down, grey and cold and ordinary. Elinor held her teacup in both hands. The letters were out of the box, they were on the table. They had been in the dark for 4 years and they were in the light now, and she had put them there, and the man across from her was reading them with the careful, serious attention of someone for whom this was not performance, and the thing she had been carrying was still heavy, but it was, she noticed, very slightly lighter than it had been this morning. She thought that this must be what sharing a weight felt like. She had forgotten. The man named Carlyle had a face that looked as though it had been designed for discouraging visits. He sat behind a desk in an office in the Home Office that was large enough to make a statement and plain enough to make a different one, powerful but not publicly so, the precise aesthetic of a man who had spent 30 years being useful to governments in ways that did not appear in official records. He had a white mustache, pale eyes, and the expression of someone who had heard a very great deal in that office, and had long since decided to believe almost none of it without supporting evidence. He looked at Alina for a long moment when the Duke introduced her. Then he looked at the Duke. "You brought someone," he said. "I brought the person who identified the problem," the Duke said. "She has information you'll want to hear directly." Carlyle looked at Alina again with the resigned patience of a man accepting an arrangement he had not requested. "Miss Ashford," he said, "please sit down." They sat. The Duke laid the Graves documentation on the desk, followed by the copied letters. He arranged them in the order they had decided on last night, the correspondence that established Alderton's general methods first, then the payment records connecting to Oakes, then the letters that placed Oakes in connection to Clifford Hale, then the dates. Carlyle looked at the arrangement without touching it. "Alderton," he said. It was not a surprised tone. It was the tone of a man coming back to something he had considered before and put aside for want of sufficient evidence. "You know the name," the Duke said. "I know the name," Carlyle said. "He has come to my attention on 3 separate occasions in the past decade. Each time the evidence was insufficient. Each time the witness or the documentation dissolved before we could act on it." He looked up. The witness dissolved on 2 occasions in ways that were deeply inconvenient. Alina looked at him steadily. "How deeply inconvenient?" "One died in what was ruled an accident," Carlyle said. "One left the country. The third simply stopped being willing to talk." He paused. "I am not a man who accepts coincidence as a pattern, Miss Ashford. I have never believed these were coincidences." "Then you've been waiting for something solid," the Duke said. "I've been waiting for something that doesn't dissolve," Carlyle said. He picked up the top document from Graves's papers and read it. He read with the speed of a man who had been processing dense information for 30 years, and his eyes moved across the page with a focus that made the room feel very still. He set it down and picked up the next one. Alina watched him read. She was aware of the Duke beside her, not looking at Carlyle, looking at Alina, and she was aware of this in the same way she was always aware of him now, which was more than she preferred to be aware of another person when she had things to focus on. She focused on Carlyle. He read all of it. He went back twice. He held one letter up toward the window as though hoping the light would reveal something additional, which was a habit she found oddly encouraging. It was the habit of someone who wanted to be thorough. When he finished, he set the last document down and looked at the desk and was silent for 30 seconds, which was a very long silence in that office. "Oakes," he said. "Yes," the Duke said. "He's in Bristol." "Yes." "I know where in Bristol," Carlyle said. He looked at Alina. "Your husband, Miss Ashford, I looked into his death at the time, informally. The results were inconclusive." He paused. "I want you to understand that inconclusive does not mean satisfactory." Alina understood the distinction. "I know," she said. "We have one problem," Carlyle said. "Everything here is strong on pattern, but it needs a direct link. The payment records connect Alderton to Oakes. The letters connect Oakes to Hale. But there is nothing here that connects Alderton directly to the events of February 1882. A careful barrister could break this into separated pieces and argue that each piece alone is circumstantial." "Oakes," the Duke said again. "If Oakes testifies, the chain becomes direct," Carlyle said. "If he doesn't, we have a strong case for Alderton's general conduct and possibly enough to significantly damage his financial and social position, but not enough for the specific." He paused. "And the specific matters to you." He was looking at Alina when he said this. "Yes," she said. Carlyle folded his hands on the desk. He had large, square hands, the hands of a man who had spent his career building things out of difficult materials, and had built things that lasted, and had left a lot of rubble along the way. "Then we need to reach Oakes before Alderton does," he said. "Can you send someone to Bristol?" the Duke asked. "I can send 2 people to Bristol by this afternoon," Carlyle said. He looked at Alina. "May I ask you something, Miss Ashford?" "Yes." "How long have you been carrying this?" She looked at him. It was a direct question and it deserved a direct answer. 4 years and 8 months, she said. He nodded once, a small decisive nod, the kind that closes one discussion and opens the next. Then let's not waste another 8, he said. He reached for a bell on the desk and rang it once, and a young man appeared at the door with the immediate presence of someone who had been waiting just outside for exactly this. "Find Whitmore," Carlyle said, "not the firm, the man, and bring him here." He looked at the Duke. "The senior partner at Whitmore and Associates is not entirely a creature of Alderton's. He became involved in Alderton's affairs gradually, the way people become involved in such things, small steps, reasonable explanations, nothing individually alarming. By the time the picture became clear, he was already implicated and had no exit." He paused. "He has also, I am informed by a source I trust, been looking for an exit, quietly, for some time." "You mean he'll cooperate?" Elinor said. "I mean he'll cooperate if we provide him with circumstances under which cooperation is both safe and possible," Carlyle said. "He is a cautious man. He needs to see that the structure is already moving before he'll commit to moving with it." "How long?" the Duke asked. "I need 48 hours, Carlyle said. 2 days. If I have Oak's statement and Whitmore's cooperation, I have a case that doesn't dissolve." Elinor looked at him. 2 days. She had been carrying this for 4 years and 8 months, and 2 days was almost nothing, except that Alderton now knew that Graves had taken something and that something had gone wrong at Windermere Park, and 2 days in which Alderton was uncertain, and moving was 2 days of risk that she could not entirely calculate. "Alderton knows something went wrong," she said. "He knows Graves took documents. He doesn't yet know what those documents show or who has them, but he'll find out, and when he does, his first instinct will be to reach Oakes before we do." "I know," Carlyle said. "This is why I'm sending 2 people to Bristol by this afternoon rather than by tomorrow morning." He paused. "I've been waiting for this for a long time, Miss Ashford. I have no intention of allowing the conclusion to dissolve like the others." There was something in his voice when he said this, something that was not the official tone of the first part of the meeting, but something more personal, more direct. The tone of a man who had accumulated a professional frustration over many years, and was now looking at the possibility of resolving it. Elinor understood this feeling very well indeed. "All right," she said, 2 days. They left Carlyle with the documents, copies they had made the evening before at the Duke's Mayfair house, the originals secured separately, and went out into the grey London morning. The street was busy with the ordinary volume of city life, carriages, people, the sound and smell of a capital conducting its business. Elinor stood on the pavement for a moment, adjusting. "Well," the Duke said. "Well," she agreed. 2 days, he said. "Yes." He was looking at the street, and she was looking at the street, and they were standing closer than the social conventions of the morning required, which was a thing she had noticed and had not corrected. "What do we do for 2 days?" he said. "We stay in London," she said. "We stay reachable. We do not make it easy for anyone who might be looking for us to find us quickly." She paused. "And we wait, which I am not very good at." "I wouldn't have guessed that," he said, with the trace of dryness she had come to recognize as his version of humor. "I'm very good at appearing to wait," she said. "It's the internal version I struggle with." "What does that look like?" "Like this," she said. "Standing on a pavement thinking about everything I cannot currently control." He turned to look at her. She was looking at the street, and she was aware of him looking at her, and she was aware of how often she was aware of him looking at her, which was more than she had been aware of another person's attention in a very long time. "You've done everything you could do," he said. "For now," she said. "For now is enough," he said. "For now is all there ever is." She turned to look at him. He was looking at her with that particular quality, direct and steady, and giving her the full weight of his attention, and she thought about the first evening and the wine and 3 words said quietly in a room full of people, and she thought about the morning in the study with the cold tea and the frost garden, and she thought about the corridor and the letters and the carriage, and she thought about the fact that she had spent 4 years being extremely careful not to depend on anyone. She was depending on him. She had been, she realized, since the moment he took her hand. She looked back at the street. "We should go back," she said. "I need to go back to Clara's. I have things to think through." "I'll come with you," he said. "You have a house in Mayfair," she said. "I do," he agreed. He made no move toward it. "Adrian," she said. It came out using his given name before she had decided to, which was the kind of thing that the practical part of herself noted and the rest of her ignored. He looked at her. "Why are you here?" she said. "Really? Alderton has targeted you, yes, but you have Carlyle, you have Fletcher, you have your own resources and your own people. You could manage this without me, without Clara's letters, without any of this." She paused. "You could have sent me home from Windermere Park with thanks and managed the rest yourself." He was quiet for a moment. The street went on around them, noisy and indifferent. "No," he said, "I couldn't have." "Why not?" He turned to look at her again. "Because the problem isn't only mine," he said. "And because," he stopped. He appeared to be choosing words with unusual care, which was from a man who generally chose words carefully, notably more careful than usual. "Because I watched a woman walk across a room at considerable personal social risk to prevent something from happening to a man she had never met, because she had already decided that she was not going to let it happen again. And I thought that this was the most extraordinary thing I had seen in a very long time." The street was loud around them. Elinor stood very still. Her practical self had several prepared responses to this. Her practical self was, at this exact moment, apparently unavailable. "I see," she said finally. "Do you?" he said. "I'm working on it," she said. He looked at her with that expression she was not being practical about, and then he looked at the street and he said, "Clara makes very good tea." "She does," Elinor said. "Then let's go back to Clara's," he said. They went. Elinor walked beside him through the grey London morning, and she thought about extraordinary and about the shape of the last 3 days, and she thought about 4 years of careful distance, and the considerable difference between choosing not to depend on someone and simply not having anyone worth depending on. She did not resolve this on the walk back. She had never been the kind of person who resolved things quickly. She had always been the kind of person who carried something and thought about it, and arrived at the answer when the answer was ready and not before. But she walked beside him through the city, and she did not move away from the proximity, and that was, she thought, something. Clara said nothing when they came back. She made tea and set out the cups with the precise movements of a woman who had many opinions she was managing with considerable professional restraint, and she placed the teapot on the table and sat down across from Elinor and the Duke and looked at them both with her calibrated neutral expression. "Carlyle is moving," Elinor said. "Good," Clara said. She poured tea. "What did he say about the case?" Elinor explained. Clara listened. The Duke added 2 specific points that Elinor had left out. She noted this with the particular awareness of someone unaccustomed to being added to, and Clara absorbed everything with the focused quiet of a person who processed information the same way Elinor did, which was to say completely, and without showing it on their face. "Oakes is the hinge," Clara said when they finished. "Yes," Elinor said. "If Oakes doesn't speak, what happens?" "We damage Alderton significantly," the Duke said. "His financial reputation, his social standing, his connections in the city. But we don't resolve the specific matter of 1882 with the legal weight that would be required." Clara looked at Elinor. Not with pity. Clara was not a woman who deployed pity, because she considered it almost always unhelpful. She looked at her with the straight, clear regard of one woman looking at another and knowing exactly what is being carried. "And if Oakes does speak?" "Then we have everything," Elinor said. Clara held Elinor's gaze for one more moment, then she looked at the Duke. "You're a useful person," she said. It was the tone she used for the highest praise she extended, which was the tone of stating a fact rather than conferring a compliment. "I appreciate it." "I appreciate the tea," the Duke said, which was exactly the right response, and Clara looked at him with an expression that was not quite a smile but was the precise set of her face that preceded one. They spent the afternoon at Clara's house. There was not much to do except think, which Elinor did sitting in the front parlor with a cup of tea and her notes, and wait, which she did badly by pretending to read a book she had taken from Clara's shelf and reading the same paragraph 11 times without taking it in. The Duke did not do very much more effectively. He sat near the window with Graves's documentation spread on the small side table, reviewing it again, and he asked Clara twice for more tea, which Clara provided without comment, and he looked out the window periodically with the expression of a man who wanted to be doing something and had correctly identified that there was currently nothing to be done. At 3:30, a message arrived from Fletcher. Clara received it at the door. The Duke had arranged for Fletcher to route communication through this address, and brought it through. The message said, Hargreaves, located in a boarding house in Sheffield, had not been met as Eleanor had predicted. He had simply gone to ground, which meant his instructions had not included provision for the plan failing, which meant whoever had sent him had not considered that outcome seriously. Fletcher was watching the boarding house and waiting for instruction. The Duke wrote back, maintain observation, do not approach yet. Another message arrived an hour later. This one was not from Fletcher. It had no return address, and it had been handed to Clara's door in the late afternoon grey by a man who, Clara reported, was unremarkable in every respect, and had walked away without looking back. The Duke opened it. He read it without any change of expression and handed it to Eleanor. It said, in a handwriting she did not recognize, Miss Ashford should consider whether her current associations serve her long-term interests. Windermere's difficulties are his own. She would do well to return to her previous arrangements before this becomes a matter that affects her directly. This is intended kindly. It was signed with nothing. Eleanor read it twice. She set it on the table. Alderton, the Duke said. Or someone acting for him, she said. He knows you're in London, the Duke said. He knows I'm somewhere, she said. He may not know this address specifically, but he knows enough. Clara, who had read the letter over Eleanor's shoulder, was quiet. Then she said, he says it's intended kindly. Yes, Eleanor said. That's a threat, Clara said, with the flat precision of someone stating a meteorological fact. Yes, Eleanor said, it's also a timetable. He's moving faster than 48 hours. The Duke looked at her. We need to move faster too. How, she said. He was quiet for a moment. He was doing the thing she had watched him do, working something through completely before speaking. Then he said, there is something I haven't told you about Oakes. She looked at him. When I said I know his name, the Duke said slowly, I should have said I know more than his name. We had a brief meeting 2 years ago. He approached me through a mutual contact, very carefully, very indirectly. He wanted to discuss the possibility of certain information about certain matters becoming available to interested parties. He did not name Alderton. He did not name anything specific. But the meeting had a quality that I recognized at the time, as a man testing whether a door was open. And was it? Eleanor said. I didn't know what door it was, he said. I said nothing definitive. I was polite. The meeting ended without result, but he paused. If Oakes was looking for a door 2 years ago, he may be looking for the same door now. Eleanor thought about this. A man who had spent years in Alderton's orbit, doing things he could not undo, looking for an exit. Not because of morality necessarily. She did not grant people motivation they had not demonstrated, but because self-preservation made different calculations over time, and a man who had been useful to Alderton was eventually going to understand what happened to people who were no longer useful to Alderton. He might speak without being compelled, she said. He might speak if he believes the structure is already moving, and that cooperation is the difference between landing on the side of it that survives and the other side, the Duke said. Which, once Carlisle's people reach Bristol, it will be. Can you get a message to Oakes directly? She said. I can try, he said. I know a man who knows him, a legitimate connection, business in Bristol, no connection to Alderton. He could reach Oakes informally without flags. Do it, she said. Tonight, he said. I'll write to him tonight. He took a piece of Clara's writing paper and sat at the table and wrote the letter. Eleanor watched him write, the quick, decisive hand of a man who thought clearly, and put it on the page without going back, and she thought about all the things that were moving simultaneously, the multiple threads running at once. Carlisle going north to Bristol, Fletcher watching Sheffield. Now a letter going through a Bristol businessman to a man named Oakes who might or might not be ready to be the thread that tied everything together. She was good at holding complexity. She had always been good at it. But she was aware that the complexity was denser now than it had been even 2 days ago, and that it was going to get denser still before it resolved, and that the window in which resolution was possible before Alderton found a way to narrow their options was closing. The afternoon moved into evening. Clara made food simple, practical, the kind of food that a household maintained for precisely these circumstances, and they ate at the small kitchen table, the three of them, and the conversation was quiet and mostly about the plan and the sequence of events, but occasionally in the spaces between the planning, it was about other things. Clara asking the Duke about the estate and him explaining the harvest with a specificity that suggested genuine interest in the land. Elinor telling Clara about the library at Windermere, which had an exceptional collection of maps. At 9 o'clock, the Duke said he should go back to Mayfair. Fletcher needed direction and the next morning required a clear head. "You can stay," Clara said, with the neutral tone she deployed when she was offering something but intended to be refused. The Duke looked at Elinor. Elinor looked at her hands. "I'll go back," he said, "but I'll be here at 7 tomorrow. Carlyle is expecting us by 9. 7, Elinor agreed. He stood, he said goodnight to Clara with the same natural courtesy he extended to everyone. He looked at Elinor. "Get some sleep," he said. "You too," she said. He went, the door closed. Clara cleared the table and Elinor sat in the kitchen, not moving, with her hands flat on the tablecloth and the letter from Alderton's direction on the table in front of her, which she had kept because it was evidence and also because she wanted to look at it. "Elinor," Clara said. Elinor looked up. "He is a very good man," Clara said. Elinor looked at the letter on the table. She did not say anything. "You are allowed to know this," Clara said. "I know it," Elinor said. "You are allowed to let it matter," Clara said. Elinor looked at her. Clara's face was exactly as it always was, straight-backed, clear-eyed, saying the true thing in the tone that didn't require anything in return. Elinor thought about practical. She thought about 4 years and 8 months. She thought about the weight of things that became lighter when shared. "I'm going to bed," she said. "Yes," Clara said. Elinor went upstairs and she lay on the small bed in Clara's spare room, and she looked at the ceiling and she thought about tomorrow and about Carlyle and about Oakes and about the letter and about Alderton moving faster than they had expected. She thought about all of this very carefully and deliberately. She did not think about 7 o'clock in the morning, when the door would knock and Adrian Cavendish would be standing on the step in the grey London early hour. She did not think about it at all. She was entirely asleep by 10. The letter arrived at 6:30. Elinor was already dressed. She had been dressed since 5, because the quality of her sleep had been adequate but not deep, the kind of sleep that rests the body while the mind continues its work, so that she woke feeling functional but not refreshed, with 3 new observations and 1 revised conclusion waiting for her the moment she opened her eyes. She was in the kitchen with tea when Clara came downstairs and handed her the envelope. It was addressed to Elinor specifically, which meant whoever had sent it knew she was at this address, which meant the message yesterday had not been a general reach but a specific one. Alderton's people knew where she was. She opened it. The letter was from Carlyle, 3 lines. One of his Bristol men had reached Oakes. Oakes had not run. Oakes had asked for 24 hours to consider his position. Carlyle was asking whether Elinor and the Duke could meet him, not at the Home Office, but at a private address in Bloomsbury, at 10 that morning. She read it twice, and then she sat back and thought about what Oakes asking for 24 hours meant. It did not mean no. A man who intended to say no said no immediately, because refusal gave him the protection of making no further contact. 24 hours was a man doing arithmetic on his own survival. 24 hours was a man deciding which side of a moving structure he preferred to land on. She also thought about the fact that Alderton now knew where she was, which meant the 24 hours were not equally available to everyone. Alderton's calculation of his own timeline was running off different information than Oakes. The door knocked at 3 minutes to 7. She opened it. The Duke was on the step in the grey morning with the particular alertness of a man who had slept adequately and had been thinking since he woke up, which she recognized because it was the state she was in herself, and she could see it in people who operated the same way. "Carlyle's message," she said, holding the letter up. "I got one as well," he said. He came inside. Clara had appeared at the top of the stairs and assessed the situation in half a second and gone back to the bedroom to finish dressing, which was the kind of efficient discretion Elinor had always relied on. They sat in the kitchen. Elinor showed him her letter. He showed her his, which had 1 additional line not in hers. Carlyle had information suggesting that Whitmore, the senior partner, had decided to cooperate. Not fully yet, but he had made contact through a mutual colleague and indicated he was willing to speak. 2 movements in the same morning, she said. 3, he said. Fletcher's message came at 6. Hargreaves has made contact with someone in Sheffield. A letter drop. Fletcher's man saw the exchange but couldn't intercept. We know the letter went somewhere but not where. Eleanor thought about the chain. Hargreaves to someone in Sheffield to someone who would carry it to Alderton or to another intermediary. Not direct, nothing was ever direct with Alderton, but the information would travel. And what Hargreaves could report was limited. He had left the estate before the visit from Graves, before the carriage south, before any of what had happened in London. His information was old. He doesn't know about Graves's papers, she said. No, the Duke said, not from Hargreaves, but he has other sources. The anonymous letter yesterday, she said. Yes, someone told him you were in London. Someone who either followed us or already had you under observation. He paused. I have been thinking about this. I believe the observation was already in place when we arrived, that it wasn't a response to our coming here but a prior arrangement, which means Alderton had already identified you before the dinner at Windermere. The anonymous letter inquiring about your whereabouts was likely already yielding results when Hargreaves's attempt failed. Eleanor absorbed this. It fitted. It was even in a dark way logical. Alderton had been working on 2 tracks simultaneously, removing the Duke's resistance through direct action and neutralizing Eleanor separately as someone whose history posed a risk. The dinner at Windermere had brought both threads into the same room by accident, or perhaps not by accident. He knew I would be at Windermere, she said. The Duke looked at her. That's what I've been considering. The Countess of Halford is a guest every year, she said slowly, and her companion has been Eleanor Ashford for 2 years. Anyone who had done the research would know that if the Countess was invited, I would come. And the dinner was planned months in advance, the Duke said, which means Alderton had months to arrange Hargreaves. But his original purpose at the dinner was not the wine glass, she said. His original purpose was information, watching who I spoke to, whether I had connections he didn't know about, whether I was still actively looking. She stopped. The poisoning, that was an addition. Something Alderton decided to do in the same window of opportunity because it was efficient, deal with the Duke's resistance and neutralize a potential problem in the same evening. 2 problems. 1 planned. Yes, which I disrupted by doing something he hadn't expected someone in my position to do, she said. A companion, the Duke said, an unimportant woman, his model of who you were did not match who you actually are. Most people's models don't, she said. It's frequently useful. He looked at her with the expression she was still not being entirely practical about, and then he looked at his tea. What he doesn't know is that his own plan gave us each other, he said. If Hargreaves hadn't been at the table, I would have thanked you for the Countess's company and probably never thought about you again after the weekend. Probably, Eleanor agreed, because it was accurate. Instead, he said. Instead, she said. They left Clara's house at 9:20 and walked to Bloomsbury, which was far enough to take time but close enough that a carriage would have been faster and more visible, and Eleanor had decided on the walk for exactly those reasons. She wanted to move through London as a person rather than a vehicle, anonymous in the crowd, one of 1,000 pairs of people on the morning pavements. She was also, she noticed, not at all averse to walking beside him. This was information she continued to file and not examine. Carlyle met them at the Bloomsbury address, a private house belonging to someone Carlyle declined to name, which suggested it was used for exactly these kinds of meetings and had a history of discretion built in. A small sitting room at the back of the ground floor, facing a walled garden. No fire. The morning was cold enough that this was a significant omission, but she supposed the discomfort was deliberate. Carlyle was already there. He looked as though he had not been to bed, which she suspected was accurate. Whitmore cooperated, he said, as soon as the door was closed. Eleanor and the Duke both went very still. He came in this morning, early. He brought his own solicitor, which suggests he has been considering this for some time and had arrangements prepared. He provided a written statement of his firm's activities on Alderton's behalf over the past 12 years. He paused. It is extremely comprehensive. How comprehensive, the Duke said. Comprehensive enough that Alderton's financial and political position is effectively destroyed the moment this reaches the right parties, Carlyle said, which it will today. He paused again. There is also a specific section about 1882, about Clifford Hale. The room was very quiet. Elinor could feel her own heartbeat. She was aware of it the way she was aware of things when they had been abstract for a long time and were suddenly, abruptly solid. "What does it say?" she said. Her voice was level, she had made sure of it. Carlyle looked at her with the careful respect of a man who understood what he was about to say and what it would mean. "It says that an arrangement was made through intermediaries to ensure that Clifford Hale would not be in a position to withdraw from a financial structure that Alderton required him to remain part of. The arrangement was described in Whitmore's statement as he looked briefly at a paper in front of him, the permanent resolution of a complication. Whitmore did not arrange it directly. He was aware of it. He processed certain payments related to it. He has provided names." Elinor looked at the walled garden. Bare walls, brown earth, a tree at the far end stripped of its leaves, very still in the cold morning air. "Oakes," she said. "Among others," Carlyle said. Oakes was the primary intermediary, but there were two other names. One of them is currently serving in a government role, which is going to make the next several weeks extremely complicated for several people in this building. The other is a man named Perrott who runs a freight business in Southampton, whose involvement appears to have been entirely logistical." She had not expected the government role. She thought about this for a moment. It explained some things, the original investigation that had been conducted and then quietly concluded, the polite dismissal she had received when she tried to raise concerns 4 years ago. The system had contained someone who needed it to stay contained. "This is going to be difficult," she said. "Yes," Carlyle said. "Will it hold?" the Duke asked. "It will hold," Carlyle said, "because Whitmore's cooperation is complete, because we now have Graves's documentation corroborating the financial patterns, because Miss Ashford's copied letters provide the direct connection to Hale's situation, and because I am going to make absolutely certain that what we have reaches enough hands simultaneously that no single person can suppress it." He paused. "I have been waiting for this moment for 8 years. I have no intention of allowing it to be managed away." 8 years, Elinor looked at him. She had not known this was his fight too. He had given no indication of personal stake in any of their meetings, but she heard it now, the same flat, determined tone she used herself when talking about things that had accumulated into something she was not going to let slip away. "Who does the government role belong to?" the Duke asked. Carlyle looked at him. "I'll tell you when it's contained," he said. "If I tell you now, it will take both of you 5 minutes to connect it to the broader picture and another 10 to act on it in ways that would complicate the process." He paused. "I'm telling you this not to be condescending, but because I know how you both operate." "How do we operate?" Elinor said. "Quickly and directly," Carlyle said, "which is extremely useful and occasionally premature." The Duke looked at Elinor. Elinor looked back at him. She had a strong instinct about whose name was in that government role, and she suspected he had the same instinct, and she suspected Carlyle knew this and was simply accepting that he could not prevent them from having it. "What do you need from us today?" she said. "Nothing," Carlyle said. "I need you to stay out of the way and stay safe. I need you not to make contact with anyone connected to Alderton or his circle. And I need you to be available by tomorrow morning for a formal statement, both of you, regarding the events at Windermere Park and everything subsequent." "You'll have it," the Duke said. Carlyle nodded. "Then go somewhere safe, both of you. Don't separate and don't," he looked at Elinor specifically, "don't do anything direct." "Not today." "I never do anything direct," Elinor said. Carlyle looked at her with an expression that suggested he had a different read on her definition of direct. "Relatively speaking," she said. She and the Duke left the Bloomsbury house and walked back into the gray morning streets. The city went on around them, indifferent and dense, a million things happening at once in every direction. "The government name," the Duke said when they were clear of the house. "I know," she said. They walked in silence for a moment. "It's Sir Henry Marsh," the Duke said. "He said it the way you say something you've been fairly certain of and are now naming." Elinor had reached the same conclusion. "Yes," she said. Sir Henry Marsh was a man she had met once briefly, when she tried to raise her concerns about Clifford's death. He had sat across from her with a polished sympathy and dismissed her in language so courteous that it had taken her 3 days to realize she had been dismissed at all. She had wondered about him since. "He's in a position to have suppressed the original investigation," she said. "Yes, Carlyle has him." "Yes, She walked. The pavement was slightly damp from the morning frost melting. and the sound of the city was in the air around them, and she thought about Sir Henry Marsh sitting somewhere in this city right now, entirely unaware that the walls he had been standing safely inside for a decade had been quietly removed, and he was now in the open. She thought about Clifford. She thought about the horse and the road and the dry winter morning in 1882 and the two men at the door with their careful faces. She thought about 4 years of carrying something heavy. She stopped walking. The Duke stopped beside her. He looked at her. He did not say anything. "I'm all right," she said. She was not entirely certain this was true, but she was going to be, which was the direction that mattered. "I know," he said. She breathed. The street went on. "What do we do today?" she said, "while we wait?" "Clara's," he said. "Tea. We wait where Carlyle knows to reach us." "Tea," she said. "Yes." They turned back toward Kensington. And somewhere across the city, in an office that handled things that did not officially happen, Carlyle was making several calls and writing several letters and setting in motion the very careful, very final piece of machinery that Eleanor Ashford had been waiting 4 years and 8 months for someone to start. The afternoon at Clara's house had a quality that Eleanor recognized from other moments of high tension and enforced inaction. The strange, pressurized stillness of waiting for something that was already in motion and could not be hurried. Clara made soup. She made it with the focused efficiency of a woman channeling everything she could not control into something she could, and she put it on the table at noon, and they ate it without talking much, which was a particular quality of the three of them together that Eleanor appreciated, the absence of obligation to fill silence. The Duke read. He had brought a book, which Eleanor noted and then forgot to be surprised by, because he was the kind of man who carried a book the way other people carried a watch, a practical instrument for the management of time. He read with the same focused completeness he applied to correspondence, which was to say he actually read it, not the vaguely distracted page-turning that people used to appear occupied while thinking about something else. Eleanor wrote. She wrote everything down, the complete sequence from the evening of the dinner to this morning's meeting with Carlyle, with the methodical precision she applied to information she needed to not lose. She wrote it in the shorthand she had developed over 4 years of carrying things she could not put in ordinary language, the compressed notation of facts and inferences and connections that she could expand later into a full account. She was writing for Carlyle's formal statement tomorrow, but she was also writing because she needed the act of laying it down on paper, the physical process of it, to make it real. At 2 o'clock, a message came from Fletcher. He had maintained observation on Hargreaves in Sheffield. In the early afternoon, 2 men had arrived at the boarding house. They had spoken with Hargreaves briefly. When they left, Hargreaves went with them. Fletcher had followed to the edge of the city before the trail went cold. Eleanor read this and was very still for a moment. "Alderton is collecting his pieces," she said. The Duke looked up from his book. She handed him Fletcher's message. "He's pulling back the people he placed," he said. Yes, Hargreaves would have told him nothing useful. The man left before Graves came, but Alderton doesn't know that. He's assuming Hargreaves is at risk, which means he's assuming more is known than he was told. She paused. Good, let him assume that. Or he's removing Hargreaves so that Hargreaves cannot become a witness, the Duke said. This was the other possibility. Eleanor had thought it and dismissed it, not because it was wrong, but because it was less useful to worry about than to act on. "Can Fletcher track them?" she said. "Beyond the city limits," the Duke said. "He'd need more people. I can send for them." He paused, but Carlyle would not want us to move on this. "No," she agreed. They looked at each other. "We tell Carlyle," she said, "immediately." The Duke wrote a quick message and sent it by the boy Clara used for errands, quick, reliable, the Kensington equivalent of a telegraph, and they went back to waiting. Eleanor to her notes, the Duke to his book. Clara disappeared into the kitchen and produced, by 4 o'clock, a cake that nobody had requested and that everyone accepted without question, because Clara's cake was the kind of offering you did not question. "Clara," Eleanor said, at some point in the afternoon. "Yes," Clara said. "Thank you for keeping those letters." Clara looked at her over the teapot. "You don't need to thank me for that." "I do," Eleanor said. "You kept something for 4 years without knowing what it was and without asking. That is a considerable thing to ask of a person." Clara was quiet for a moment. "You'd have done the same," she said. "You have done the same for me on different occasions." That's not the point, Elinor said. It is the point, Clara said firmly. The point is that some people carry things for each other. That is not a service or a favor. It is simply what people who trust each other do. Elinor looked at her hands. I'm not very good at allowing people to carry things for me, she said. No, Clara said, you're exceptional at it when you have no choice and atrocious at it when you do. She paused. You are learning, however. The Duke, from behind his book, she's right. You're reading, Elinor said. I'm doing both, he said. He turned a page. She's right. Clara looked at him with the expression that was one step from a smile. Elinor looked at the window. I know she's right, Elinor said, which cost her something and which she paid without regret. At 5 o'clock, Carlyle's response arrived to the message about Hargreaves. It said, 2 men following Hargreaves identified as likely associated with Oak's Bristol network, not Alderton's London connections directly. Hargreaves was being moved not to be silenced but to be used a final piece, perhaps a witness Alderton intended to discredit or deploy, depending on what Carlyle's investigation produced. This suggested Alderton now knew about Carlyle's involvement. This suggested he had sources inside the Home Office, which, given Sir Henry Marsh, was unfortunately not a surprise. It also said, Oakes has agreed, he is speaking tonight. Elinor read this once, she set it down. He's speaking tonight, she said. The Duke looked up. It's done, she said. Or as close to done as this gets. He looked at her steadily. He did not say anything, which was the right response. He'll have Oakes' testimony tonight, she said. Whitmore's statement this morning, Graves's documentation, my letters, the formal statements from both of us tomorrow. She stopped. Alderton is finished. The word finished had a particular quality when she said it. It was not triumphant. It was not relieved. It had the weight of something that had been waiting to be true for a very long time and was now true, and the weight was still there even though the thing that had created it was done. She was quiet. Clara did not speak. The Duke set his book down and looked at her and waited, because he had the particular quality of understanding when what a moment needed was not a response but a presence. She had observed this in him, and it was one of the things she had not examined directly, because she suspected that if she examined it directly she would have to decide what to do about it. She breathed, the room held her. The October evening was coming down outside, settling over London the way it always did, indifferent and absolute. I need some air, she said. She went out into Clara's small back garden. It was a narrow space, a path between 2 walls, a bench, a fig tree that had given up for the season, cold and still. The last light was going from the sky in strips of grey and pale gold. She sat on the bench. She thought about Clifford, which she did now in the way she had always done, practically without warmth, with the particular unflinching honesty she applied to things she could not change. He had not been a good man. He had been charming and he had been useful and he had been genuinely good company on the right evening, and he had made her believe things about himself that were not true. She did not hold this against him in the way grief requires you to hold things. She held it in the way of a record that is accurate. She thought about the morning in February 1882. She thought about the road and the frost and the horse. She thought about the fact that now, for the first time, there would be a record. There would be names and statements and documentation, and there would be a version of events that was true, and it would exist in a place where it could not be simply dismissed or managed or buried under the polite dismissal of men who had decided it was not useful to know. She sat with this for a long time. She heard the door behind her and did not turn. He sat down on the bench beside her, not close, the appropriate distance. She was aware of him the way she was always aware of him. All right, he said. Yes, she said. You don't have to be, he said. I know, she said. I happen to actually be, which is its own kind of strange. He was quiet. The garden was dark enough now that the fig tree was just a shape. The walls were solid dark on either side. What does strange feel like? He said. She thought about this seriously because it was a real question. Like something I've been braced for has ended, she said. The bracing is still there, the thing is not. He nodded, not the social nod that means I'm listening, the actual nod. It takes time, he said, for the body to stop bracing. You speak from experience, she said. My father's death, he said. When I was 26, he was not an easy man. I spent 5 years after he died waiting for him to disapprove of something I was doing, and then one day I realized I had not done that in a week, and that took another month to feel normal. She looked at him. He was looking at the garden, or the dark where the garden had been. Grief and relief at the same time, she said. Yes, he said. She was quiet. The city was a distant sound behind the walls. I don't know what I'm going to do next, she said. After this, I have been doing this in one form or another for 4 years. When it's finished, when Carlisle has everything and it's over, I don't know what the next thing is. What would you like it to be? He said. She had not been asked this in so long that the question took a moment to reach her properly. She looked at the dark garden. She thought about it honestly. Something that uses what I'm actually good at, she said. I'm good at reading situations. I'm good at being invisible in rooms. I'm good at understanding people who are hiding things. She paused. That's a fairly specific set of capabilities. Carlisle has people with exactly those capabilities, the Duke said. Careers of it, legitimate careers. She had considered this. He suggested as much this morning, she said. He did, the Duke said. She turned to look at him. It was dark enough now that his face was mostly shape and the occasional glint of the light from the kitchen window, but she could see enough. She had always been able to see enough. And what would you like, she said. After this, what is the next thing for you? He looked at her for a moment. Something I have been avoiding saying since a room full of people watched me take a stranger's hand, he said. The cold garden was very still. Elinor did not look away. She was not going to look away from this. You should probably say it then, she said. I think, he said carefully in the way he did everything that mattered, that I would like to know you, properly, without an ongoing crisis as the context. He paused. I am aware that this is an unusual thing to propose to someone you have known for 3 days. It is, she said. I am also aware, he said, that 3 days under certain circumstances can cover considerable ground. They can, she said. He looked at her, she looked back. She thought about everything that had been said between them in 3 days, in the drawing room, in the study, in the corridor, in the carriage, on the London pavement. She thought about what she had told him and how he had received it. She thought about a man who said, I believe you, in a room full of people, and meant it for the one person who needed to hear it. She thought about 4 years of carrying something that had just become, for the first time, not hers to carry alone. I would like that too, she said, the knowing you properly part without the crisis. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, good. Just that one word, good, the way he said things that mattered simply and completely and without ornament. Elinor looked at the dark garden. She was aware that she was cold, and that she had not been aware of it until this moment, and that the cold was actually rather significant now she had noticed it. We should go back inside, she said. Yes, he said. They went in. Clara was in the kitchen. The lamp was on. The cake was on the table. It smelled of warmth and tea and the ordinary specific miracle of a house that had held safe things for a long time. Elinor sat down. Clara put tea in front of her without being asked. The Duke sat across the table and Clara put tea in front of him too, and she looked between the two of them once briefly, and then went back to the kitchen with the expression of a woman who had many opinions and had decided to keep them for another day. Elinor wrapped her hands around the cup. Warm, just warm. Tomorrow was the formal statement. Tomorrow was the end of the active part of this, and the beginning of whatever Carlisle's machinery produced next. Tomorrow was a step into the open. She was ready. She had been ready for 4 years. She had just been waiting for the door. They gave their formal statements at 9 in the morning, separately, in rooms that smelled of old paper and institutional carpet. Elinor's room had a window that faced a brick wall, which she found oddly calming, nothing to look at, nothing to distract. She sat across from a man who wrote very quickly and asked questions with the precise neutrality of someone who had done this many times and knew the difference between guiding a witness and pushing one. She told him everything in the order it had happened. She was accurate and thorough, and she did not embellish anything, because the facts were sufficient and embellishment was how you gave clever barristers something to work with. She had learned this from the solicitor who had dismissed her 4 years ago, who had done her the inadvertent service of teaching her exactly how evidence could be minimized by the people who held it. She did not make that easy. When she finished, the man across from her read back a section of her statement about the correspondence she had found at Windmere Park, and she confirmed it, and he made a small note. The copied letters, he said, the originals were destroyed. Yes, she said, in February 1882, by me. He did not react to this. On what date? The 5th, she said. The evening after the funeral. You have clear recollection of this. I have clear recollection of everything in that period, she said, which was true and which she had spent considerable effort wishing were not true and had eventually accepted. He wrote something. Miss Ashford, he said, looking up, the material you have provided in combination with the other statements received in the past 24 hours constitutes one of the most complete accounts of this type of conduct that this office has assembled. He paused, and she had the sense that he was departing briefly from the professional neutral and saying something direct. I am sorry it took this long. She looked at him. So am I, she said. She came out of the room at 10:30. The Duke was already in the corridor, finished before her, which she had expected. His statement covered less personal ground. He looked at her when she came out. All right, he asked. Yes, she said, which was true in the functional sense and approximately true in the other sense. She was good. She was going to continue to be good. The past was still the past and would continue to be the past, but it was now a past that existed in a record rather than only in her. This was different, this was better. Carlyle met them both in a third room, a meeting room larger, with actual daylight coming through the window, which she appreciated. He looked like a man who had been awake for 36 hours, and who had found this entirely worthwhile. Oakes spoke, he said, without preamble. For 6 hours last night, with his solicitor present, a complete statement. He placed a thin folder on the table between them. I'm not going to show you the full text. There are elements that touch on ongoing matters I can't share yet. But I will tell you that his account of the events of February 1882 is specific, detailed, corroborated by the documentation from Graves and the letters from Whitmore, and is credible. Eleanor looked at the folder. He names Alderton directly, the Duke asked. Directly, Carlyle said. Alderton commissioned the arrangement, through 2 intermediaries, one of whom is Oakes, one of whom is a man named Perrott who I mentioned yesterday. Oakes' account is corroborated on the Perrott side by the payment records from Whitmore's firm. The chain is complete. The room was quiet. Eleanor sat back. She had imagined this moment a great many times in the past 4 years, not in detail, not with the specific people and the specific words, because she had not had the specific people to imagine. But she had imagined the feeling of it, the particular quality of a thing that had been uncertain becoming certain. It was nothing like she had imagined. It was less dramatic and more physical. She felt it in her chest and her hands and the back of her eyes and nowhere else. It was not relief exactly. It was the thing after relief, when your body believes the danger has passed and begins, slowly and carefully, to stand down. What happens to Alderton, she said. He will be brought in today, Carlyle said. Not publicly, not yet, that comes later. For now his financial interests will be frozen, the people he has connections to will be notified through appropriate channels, and he will be required to give an account of himself. He paused. The process will be lengthy. It will take months, not days. The case is strong, extremely strong, but these things do not happen in a week. I understand, she said. What you should understand, Carlyle said, looking at her directly, is that you were right, about all of it, from the beginning. 4 years ago, when you came to someone in this building with concerns that should have been heard properly and were not, you were right. I am saying this officially, Miss Ashford, and I am saying it on behalf of this office. She met his gaze. She had prepared over 4 years to hear a version of this. She had prepared for the satisfaction it would contain and the management she would need to do with it, because satisfaction in the wrong hands became smugness, and smugness made you careless. What she had not prepared for was how much it cost to hear it, the simple cost of being told, by someone in the position to make it formal, that you had been telling the truth all along. She looked at the window for a moment. Thank you, she said. Then what about Sir Henry Marsh? Carlyle looked at her. He knew she had figured it out. She suspected he had expected her to. He has been asked to step back from his duties pending an inquiry, Carlyle said, with the careful language of a man managing information in multiple directions simultaneously. He will not interfere with this process. That is all I am able to tell you at this time. That's enough, she said. They left at noon. The morning had gone by faster than she had expected, which she found was characteristic of important things. They moved quickly when they finally moved, after all the long, slow preparation. The Duke walked beside her on the Whitehall pavement, which was busy at this hour with the various business of government conducted on 2 feet. She walked with her usual efficiency, and he matched it, which she appreciated. She was not in the mood for a pace that suggested leisure. "It will be months," she said. "Yes," he said. "There will be barristers and procedures and documents, and probably several moments where it seems as though it might still fall apart." "Probably," he said. "And Alderton will have a very good barrister, and will attempt to manage his exposure, and will probably succeed in some of the smaller peripheral matters." "That's likely," he said. She was quiet for a moment, "But the core of it," she said. "The core of it is done," he said. She nodded. The pavement went on. London went on. She thought about what months of the process would look like, what her life would look like in those months. She was still technically employed as the Countess of Halford's companion, which she supposed was still true in the sense that the Countess had not dismissed her, and she had not resigned. But the shape of things had changed considerably in the past 4 days, and she was not certain the old arrangement fitted the new shape. She thought about what Carlyle had said about people who did what she did, and made careers of it. She thought about what the Duke had said in the garden, knowing you properly. She thought about how, for the first time in 4 years, she could think about the future without the weight of the past dragging every thought backward. "I need to speak with the Countess," she said. "She's still at Windermere Park," the Duke said. "Yes, I should go back." He was quiet for a moment. "We can go back together," he said. "I have a house that appears to need its owner back, given that I have been in London conducting irregular business for 2 days. "Yes," she said. They went back to Clara's to collect Eleanor's things, which were minimal, as she had packed for a weekend gathering and had not anticipated London, and Clara met them at the door with 2 cups of tea already prepared, which was either the particular gift of a woman who understood her people or an indication that she had been watching through the front window. "Probably both." "You're going," Clara said. "Tomorrow morning," Eleanor said. "I need to speak with the Countess and I need to think." "Come back in a week," Clara said. "When you've thought." "Yes," Eleanor said. Clara looked at the Duke. "Take care of her," she said. "She is considerably better at taking care of herself than anyone in either of our lives," he said, "so I generally consider it enough to just be available." Clara looked at Eleanor. "Keep him," she said. "Clara," Eleanor said. "You can pretend I didn't say it if you prefer," Clara said, with the perfect neutrality of a woman who was entirely at peace with what she had said. Eleanor did not pretend she hadn't said it. She finished her tea and she embraced Clara, which was not something they did often and therefore meant something when they did, and she picked up her bag, and she went out to the carriage that the Duke had arranged. The journey back to Windermere Park was not the same as the journey away from it. The same roads, the same October countryside, the same unmarked carriage, but the direction was reversed, and the weight of what she was carrying was different, and the person sitting across from her had, in the intervening days, become someone she was not pretending was simply useful. They talked this time in the way people talk when the urgent thing has passed and the space opens up for the non-urgent. He told her about the estate, the specific material reality of it, not the grandeur but the work, the tenants and the land and the decisions that running a place of that size required every day regardless of what else was happening. She found this interesting because it was genuine, and because it told her things about him that the crisis situation had not, the quality of care he had for the people who depended on him, the precision of his understanding of the land, the way he spoke of his responsibilities as things he had chosen rather than things he had inherited. She told him about the years between Clifford's death and the present, not the painful parts, those had been told already in the corridor, in the study, in all the places they had spoken in the last 3 days. She told him the other parts, the Countess who was infuriating and kind in equal measure and who had given Eleanor a useful invisibility for 2 years, the houses she had moved through, the things she had observed. The particular education in human character that came from watching from the edges of rooms over many years. "You've been doing Carlyle's work for 4 years, the Duke said, without Carlyle's support." "I've been doing it for my own reasons," she said, with the side effect of becoming rather good at it. He knows that, the Duke said. He'll ask you formally. I suspect he's already drafting the letter. She thought about this. A legitimate use of everything she had spent years building into a skill. A position that would require exactly what she was good at, in rooms similar to the ones she had already spent years in, for purposes that would give the work a weight it had previously lacked. Perhaps, she said. More than perhaps, he said. She looked out the window. The countryside was moving past in its autumn state, stripped and honest, everything bare that had been covered all summer, the bones of the landscape showing through. She had always found the English countryside more beautiful in October than any other month, for exactly this reason. Things showed themselves. What do you want? She said. Not about Carlyle, she meant it more broadly. He looked at her, he was quiet for a moment. Specifically or generally, he said. Both. He thought about it the way he thought about things, actually, with the full attention of a man who took questions seriously. Generally, he said, I want to do the things I'm doing more fully than they've been done. The estate, the people on it. The work I've been doing, which is significant and which I've let be partly overshadowed by everything Alderton has represented in the last 18 months. He paused. Specifically, I want to see how the winter light looks on the Windermere Library from the chair near the east window, with someone who would actually read the books rather than just look at them. Eleanor looked at him. Someone specific, she said. Extremely specific, he said. The carriage moved through the afternoon countryside. The light was going long and gold the way it did in October, lying across the fields like something deliberate. Eleanor thought about the east window. The Windermere Library has excellent maps, she said. It does, he said. And a reasonable collection of natural history, she said. I noticed it the afternoon I spent working. I have more than you noticed, he said. The good ones are on the lower shelves, most people don't look. She turned to look at him. I always look at the lower shelves, she said. He looked back at her. I know, he said. The carriage went on through the gold afternoon, carrying them home. They reached Windermere Park in the early evening, the long drive illuminated by the last of the October light, the oak trees enormous and still in the windless dusk. The house had its lamps lit already, warm squares of light in the stone facade, and it looked, Eleanor thought, like a place that had been waiting. Fletcher met them at the door. He looked at the Duke first, then at Eleanor, and his expression performed a very rapid assessment. Everything is in order at the house, he said. The guests began departing yesterday. The Countess of Halford is the last remaining. She's asked after Miss Ashford twice. I'll speak with her now, Eleanor said. Fletcher nodded. She's in the south drawing-room. She's been there most of the afternoon with a novel and what I suspect is her third cup of tea. Eleanor went through the house. It had the particular quiet of a large building recently emptied of company, the kind of silence that still carries a slight echo of voices, as though the rooms are remembering them. She went to the south drawing-room and knocked and opened the door. The Countess of Halford was precisely where Fletcher had said she would be, in the chair by the window, which she had positioned to catch the last of the light, with a novel in one hand and a teacup in the other. She looked up when Eleanor came in and her face went through several things in quick succession: relief, concern, assessment, and then the particular decision to prioritize the cup of tea above everything else until greetings were complete. My dear, she said, come and sit down. You look like you've been doing something exhausting. I have been doing something exhausting, Eleanor said and sat. The Countess handed her tea without asking, which was one of the things Eleanor would always appreciate about the Countess. She understood that practical comfort was a better response than questions in certain moments. The Duke mentioned urgent business, the Countess said, when Eleanor had finished the tea. Yes, Eleanor said. Connected to the incident with the wine. Eleanor looked at her. The Countess returned the look with the serene intelligence of a woman who had been in society for 60 years and had stopped pretending she didn't understand things a long time ago. Connected to the incident with the wine, Eleanor confirmed. And is it resolved? It will be, Eleanor said, in the coming months. The mechanism is in place. The Countess nodded with the calm of a woman who dealt in outcomes rather than details. I see, she set down her novel. Eleanor, may I ask you something directly? Of course, Eleanor said. Are you well? It was not the question Alina had been preparing for. She had been preparing for questions about the Duke, about London, about the Countess's own social reputation, and whether the household disruptions of the past days had damaged it. She had not been preparing for that particular directness. "Yes," she said, "I am more so than I have been in quite some time." The Countess looked at her for a moment. Her eyes, which had always been sharp under the social softness she deployed in public, were very clear and direct now. "You have been carrying something for a long time," the Countess said. It was not a question. "Yes," Alina said. "And you are less so now." "Yes." The Countess picked up her teacup and looked at it and set it down again. "I have wondered," she said, "on several occasions, whether I was providing you with employment or simply with useful cover." Alina considered this. It was an accurate observation. "Both," she said. "I see," the Countess said, "and going forward." Alina looked at the window. The last of the light was completely gone now, and the garden was dark behind the glass, just Alina's reflection and the Countess's lamp and the long room behind them. "I think," Alina said carefully, "that my circumstances may be changing." "In what direction?" Alina looked at her. The Countess looked back with the expression of a woman who had already formed her own conclusions and was simply waiting to see how Alina would articulate hers. "I have been offered," Alina said slowly, "the possibility of work that is more formally suited to my abilities, and there may be other changes as well. I'm not certain of all of them yet." "Other changes," the Countess said, with the particular neutrality of a woman who was being extremely neutral on purpose. "I'm not certain," Alina said again. "Of course," the Countess said. She picked up her novel. "Well, whatever you decide, I hope you know that I have valued you considerably. Not simply as a competent and invisible companion which you have been, but as a person I have found to be worth knowing." She opened the novel to her page. "And if the other changes you are uncertain of involve the person who has been looking at you in that particular way since you returned, then I wish you all the best with it." Alina looked at her. "You've been watching." "I always watch," the Countess said. "You didn't think you were the only one in this house with that particular skill." Alina made a sound that was close to a laugh. It surprised her. It felt light and real and genuine in a way that laughter sometimes did when it arrived unexpectedly, before you had decided whether the moment warranted it. "I'll stay for the rest of the week," Alina said. "If you're remaining." "I'll remain another 3 days," the Countess said. "I want to walk the garden properly when the weather improves. After that I'll go back to London." She paused. "You'll come with me or you won't." "I'll know by then," Alina said. "Good," the Countess said, and opened her novel, and that was the end of the conversation, which was very much the Countess's way. Say the thing, confirm the thing, proceed. Alina went out of the drawing room and stood for a moment in the corridor. She was aware of the house around her, the size of it, the solidity of it, the way it held everything in the quiet that large, well-kept houses hold when the business of the day is done. She was aware of the library at the end of the east wing, and the east window and the lower shelves. She was also aware, with the specific and rather inconvenient awareness that had been accumulating for 4 days, of the Duke, who was somewhere in this house, having his own conversation with Fletcher or writing his own correspondence or standing at a window looking out at the dark garden. She went back to her room and she changed her dress and she sat at the small writing desk and she wrote a letter to Clara, which was something she did whenever she needed to organize her own thinking. The act of addressing Clara's practical intelligence on paper made Alina's own thinking more precise. She told Clara what had happened with Carlyle and Oakes and Whitmore. She told her about the formal statements. She told her about the Countess. Then she sat for a moment with the pen in her hand. She wrote, "I think I may be in a situation I did not plan for. I'm not sure what to call it yet, but I think you would recognize it. I believe I am learning to let someone carry a part of what I carry. This is very new. I'm not sure I am doing it correctly. I suspect I will continue trying." She sealed the letter, which she would send with the morning post. Then she went to the library. She expected to find it empty. She had not considered that she would go to the library at this hour and that he would have had the same idea, for his own reasons, and that they would arrive at the same space at the same time by independent decision. He was already there. Standing near the window, the east window, which was what she had come to see, with a book in his hand. He had not lit more than one lamp. The room was mostly dark and the window showed the black garden outside. He looked up when she came in. "I was looking for the natural history collection," she said. "Lower shelves," he said, "east wall." She went to the east wall and crouched down and ran her fingers along the spines until she found one she recognized, a natural history of the English coast, published 40 years ago, that she had read as a child and then never found again. She stood and held it. He was watching her. "I know this book," she said. "It was my mother's," he said. "She brought it to the estate when she married, and she left it when she left for France, which I have always thought was either a statement or an oversight." "Which do you think it was?" "A statement," he said. "She was not a woman who overlooked things." Elena looked at the book, then she looked at him. "Tell me about her," she said. She had not planned to say this. It came out of the part of her that was learning to be genuinely curious about a person rather than strategically curious. He looked slightly surprised, not unpleasantly, more the surprise of someone whose expectations have been adjusted in a direction they prefer. "She was formidable," he said, "and unhappy here in the specific way of a woman whose capabilities exceed what her circumstances allow her to use. She managed the estate's social obligations with a precision that I did not fully appreciate until I was running it myself and understood what it required. She taught me to observe people, which I think was partly deliberate and partly simply what living with her required." "She taught you to believe women who told you difficult things," Elena said. He looked at her. "No," he said, "that I learned from not believing one and understanding afterward what it had cost. I was young. A woman I knew told me something was wrong with a situation I was part of. I did not believe her." He paused. "I was wrong. I decided some years ago that I would not repeat that." Elena looked at him across the dark library. "What does it cost," she said, "to believe people?" "Generally." "Occasionally you are wrong," he said, "and you have extended trust that was not warranted, which is embarrassing and sometimes costly." He paused. "But the cost of that is considerably less over time than the cost of the alternative." She stood with the book in her hands. He stood at the window with his book. The lamp between them was the only light in the room, and it made the space feel very small and very particular. She thought about the dinner. She thought about the wine spreading across the cloth and the room going still, and a man crossing toward her not with the gracious social management she had expected, but with a hand and 3 words. "I have not thanked you," she said, "properly for the first evening." "You spilled my wine," he said. "I think the balance is in your favor." "You said something that no one has said to me in 6 years," she said, "and you said it in front of 40 people. That had a cost." "Social inconvenience," he said, "minimal." "You didn't know that at the time," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "No," he admitted, "I didn't." "What made you do it?" she said. He considered the question. He was holding his book, but he was not looking at it. "Your face," he said, "when you realized what was going to happen, what the room was about to do. You had done something that required a great deal of courage, and you were about to carry the social consequence of it alone, and your face went composed, very precisely composed. The way a person is composed when they have decided that they will hold the thing even if it costs them." He stopped. "I have seen that face before, on people who did not deserve to hold things alone." Elena looked at him. 4 years of holding things, alone, precisely composed. The library was very quiet. "I'm going to read my book," she said. "I know," he said. She moved to the chair near the east window, the chair he had mentioned in the carriage, which was the correct chair she saw immediately, the one that caught the lamplight at the best angle and faced the shelves rather than the wall. She sat down in it. He did not leave. He returned to his previous position, slightly to her left, near enough that the lamp reached them both. She opened the book. The familiar print of 40 years ago, the careful illustrations. She read. He read. The lamp burned between them. The house was quiet and the garden was dark, and outside the autumn night was doing what it did, steadily and without opinion. And Elena Ashford sat in the chair near the east window of the Windermere Library with a book she had missed for 30 years and the particular warmth of another person's presence, close and calm and undemanding. And she was not, for the first time in a very long time, alone with what she was carrying. This was, she thought, enough for one evening. It was, in fact, rather more than enough. The next morning brought a frost and a letter. The frost Elena expected. It had been coming for days in the quality of the air and the particular coldness that settled over the estate at night. The letter she did not expect, although she should have, because she was better at expecting things when she was not also doing other things simultaneously. It was from Alderton. Fletcher brought it to her at breakfast with the expression of a man who had assessed the envelope and made several conclusions, and was now delivering those conclusions in the form of a piece of correspondence. The handwriting on the outside was not Alderton's. She had seen his in the files, a sharp, controlled script, but something more careful, more constructed, the handwriting of a man having someone else write what he was composing. This was, in itself, information. The Duke was not at breakfast yet. She was alone at the long table with the morning light and her tea, and she opened the letter. It was short, 3 paragraphs. The first paragraph was a polite introduction that used the word unfortunate 4 times, which she found almost admirable in its density. The second paragraph contained a proposal, a face-saving arrangement, Alderton's language, though he used more words than that. If certain parties would agree to conduct their current activities with restraint and allow certain matters to be resolved privately, then Alderton was prepared to offer appropriate recognition of past difficulties, and to ensure that relevant parties received appropriate consideration going forward. The third paragraph contained a single sentence. I believe we are both adults who understand that the world is run by people willing to manage complexity, and I would be very sorry to see this become something less comfortable for everyone involved. Elena set the letter on the table. She drank her tea. The Duke came in at 8:05. He poured himself tea and looked at the letter on the table and then at Elena. She handed it to him. He read it. His face did not change in the ways that anger would have changed it. She had seen what his face did when he was genuinely angry, which was less than she had expected and more precise than most people managed. What she saw now was a different quality, the particular stillness of a man confronting something he had already accounted for. He's offering a settlement, the Duke said. On his terms, she said, with language designed to make both of us feel that cooperation is a mutual benefit rather than a capitulation. You don't intend to accept it, he said. No, she said, do you? No, he said. Then we forward it to Carlyle immediately, she said, as evidence. This is Alderton demonstrating that he knows we are in contact with the Home Office and that he is attempting to manage the situation before it becomes formally unmanageable. She paused. Which means he does not yet know how advanced Carlyle's case is. He knows Oakes spoke last night, the Duke asked. He may not know the substance of what Oakes said, she said, or he may know Oakes spoke and not know how complete the statement was. Either way, this letter is evidence that he is still trying to negotiate, which is evidence that he does not yet believe the case against him is closed. It nearly is, the Duke said. It is, she said. The letter doesn't change that. He looked at her across the table. You're certain? Carlyle has 4 independent streams of evidence, she said. Graves's documentation, Whitmore's statement, Oakes' testimony, my copied letters. Each one corroborates the others at the critical points. No single element depends on the others to stand. This letter is a man who believes he still has room to maneuver, and he does not. He's frightened, the Duke said. Yes, she said. Or the people around him are frightened, which comes to the same thing. She wrote back to Carlyle. She did this at the breakfast table, which was not the most comfortable writing surface, but was the available one, with the efficiency of a woman who had long since stopped waiting for ideal conditions. She described the letter and what she had concluded from it, and forwarded the original with the message. By the time she had finished writing, Fletcher had appeared and the Duke had explained, and the letter was dispatched. They sat at the table for a moment in the post-action quiet. I keep waiting, she said, for the other action. Which one? Something more direct, she said. We have been dealing with his methods, the footman, the anonymous letter, the approach through Whitmore, now this, all indirect, all operating through layers. She paused. At some point when the layers stop working, a certain type of person becomes direct. He has always operated through intermediaries, the Duke said. That is his particular structure. People change their structure under sufficient pressure, she said, especially people who have been protected by layers for so long that they have forgotten they are capable of directness. She looked at the window. I want Graves moved to somewhere more secure. Fletcher can arrange it. Today, she said. Today, he agreed. She spent the morning in the library, not reading the natural history book. She had taken it to her room the night before with the specific intention of returning it, and had then not returned it, which she did not examine. She spent the morning at the desk, going through the documentation she had accumulated over 3 days, arranging it in the order Carlyle would need for the formal presentation when the case moved to its next stage. This was methodical work, and she was good at it, and it occupied the practical part of her while the rest of her thought about a letter that was, on its surface, a negotiation, and was actually a measure of distance. How much did Alderton know? How much time did he have? How frightened was he? The answer to all three was, less than he needed, very little, and extremely. Fletcher came to the library at 11 with news. Graves had been moved to a house in the Oxfordshire countryside belonging to a contact of Carlyle's, accompanied by 2 men whose professional discretion was guaranteed. He was, Fletcher reported, calm and eating well, which Fletcher seemed to consider a reliable indicator of a man's essential stability. He understands that his safety depends on the case proceeding, Eleanor said. He understands it completely, Fletcher said. He is, I think, a man who has been waiting for the weight of what he did to be used for something better. This is better. Eleanor looked at him. Fletcher was, she had concluded, one of those people who appeared unobservable and were in fact extremely perceptive, and who had opinions they did not share except when they were relevant. Thank you, she said. For what specifically, he said. For not making this more complicated than it needed to be, she said. 4 days ago you could have made this very difficult. You had every reason. Your employer had just had an unexplained social incident at his dinner. A strange woman was making claims about his footman. None of it made immediate sense. You could have prioritized the social management of the situation over the substance of it. Fletcher looked at her. I made a judgment, he said. A fast one, she said. I'm employed, Fletcher said, by a man who makes fast judgments and is usually right. I decided to extend the benefit of the doubt. He paused. Also, your hands were entirely steady. I'm sorry. When it would have been natural to be shaking, he said. When a person spills something dramatically in front of a room of people and has all those eyes on them, the physical response is usually involuntary. Your hands were completely steady, which meant you had done the thing deliberately, which meant there was a reason, which meant I should pay attention. Eleanor looked at him. She was aware that she was being assessed, in retrospect, by someone with very good eyes, and that the assessment had come out correctly. You should have been Carlyle, she said. I find the work I'm doing more interesting, Fletcher said pleasantly, and went back to whatever he had been doing before. Eleanor returned to the papers. The day moved. The frost on the garden melted by noon, and the afternoon came in grey and still, without the wind of the previous days, the world between weathers. She saw the Duke twice, once crossing the corridor outside the library on what appeared to be his own business, and once when he brought her a cup of tea that she had not asked for and set it on the desk without comment and left, which she found, for reasons she did not examine, extremely good. She was aware, in the sustained and rather relentless way she had been aware for 4 days, that the acute phase of this situation was ending. The mechanisms were in place. The evidence was secure. Carlyle was moving. Alderton was retreating. There was still the formal process to endure, the months of legal procedure, the careful building of the case into something that could not be managed away, but the active danger had passed, and the part of her that had been operating at high intensity for 4 days was beginning, tentatively, to ease. This left space, and in the space, unoccupied by urgent things, were all the non-urgent things that had been accumulating. She ate dinner with the Countess and the Duke in the smaller dining room. The guests were gone, and the large dining room would have felt absurd for 3 people, and the conversation was the kind that happened when people who had been through something together settled into the ordinary register. The Countess talked about London. The Duke talked about a plan for the estate's winter drainage that he had been working on for a year and had put aside during the Alderton period and now intended to resume. Eleanor ate and listened and contributed and felt the particular quality of an evening that was simply an evening. Not a crisis, not a waiting, just 3 people in a room with food and light, and the specific luxury of nothing requiring immediate action. After dinner, the Countess went upstairs with her novel, and Eleanor and the Duke were left in the drawing room with the fire and the port decanter, which was a social situation she had not quite been in before with him, and which had a different quality from the urgent conversations and the London expeditions and the library. She took a chair near the fire. He took one across from her. He poured the port and handed her a glass which she accepted. "You're thinking," he said. "I think constantly," she said. "You've observed this." "You're thinking about something specific," he said. "You have the quality you get when you're working something through." She looked at him. "You've noticed this." "In the past 4 days I have noticed approximately everything about you," he said, with the even tone of a man stating a fact he had made peace with. "This is not unusual for me. Generally, I pay attention to things, but the quality is different in this case." Elinor held her glass. The fire was warm on her hands. "I've been thinking about what comes next," she said, "for me. And I find," she said slowly, "that for the first time in 4 years the next thing is not defined by the thing I've been doing." She paused, "which should feel like freedom." "But," he said, "but I have also discovered in the past 4 days that I have been more, that I function better, when there is someone who knows what I'm doing." She stopped. This was not quite what she meant. She tried again. "I have been very good at being alone with my purpose, but I have been better this week when I wasn't." He was looking at her with the quality she could not be entirely practical about. "That's true for most people," he said. "It's harder to admit for some than for others." "I was convinced," she said, "for a long time that depending on someone created a vulnerability. I had evidence for this. The evidence was compelling. It was also," he said carefully, "evidence about specific people, not about dependence generally." "I know," she said. "I know this now more than I knew it 4 days ago." She looked at the fire. "I'm saying it imprecisely. What I mean is, I did not expect to find that the next thing, the thing after the 4 years, might include someone, and I find I am not opposed to it." She had meant to say something more direct than this. The practical part of her noted that she had arrived at something approximately correct, but more hedged than she intended, and that she could say it more directly if she chose to. She chose to. "I am not opposed to you," she said, "specifically, which is a significant statement from a person who has spent 4 years carefully opposed to everyone." The fire crackled, the room was warm, the port was good. The Duke set his glass down and looked at her with the expression she was not being practical about, and said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "I appreciate the precision." "Precision is what I have," she said. "It's enough," he said. "It's considerably more than enough." She drank her port and he drank his, and the fire went on and the evening went on, and the house was quiet around them. They talked for another hour, not about Alderton or Carlisle or the case. They talked about the estate in winter, which apparently was its own world distinct from the autumn gathering version, about the drainage plan, about a particular walk along the estate's north boundary that he described as the best view of the countryside, and which he had not taken in 18 months because there had always been something else requiring him. About books, she had opinions about the natural history collection, and he had opinions about her opinions, and they disagreed pleasantly about 2 volumes, and agreed completely about a third. It was, Elinor thought, the most ordinary hour she had spent in the company of another person since she could remember. She went to bed at 10:30. She lay in the dark guest room and listened to the house settle, and she thought about the morning ahead and the days after the morning, which stretched out in a direction she had not previously had the ability to consider without the weight of the past pulling every thought backward. She could consider them now. They were just days, ordinary open days. She fell asleep quickly and slept deeply and woke at 6 to a pale autumn morning that was not quite frost and not quite clear, the in-between quality of a season genuinely changing. She dressed and went downstairs. She would write to Carlisle this morning. She would speak with the Countess about arrangements for the return to London. She would send the reply to Alderton's letter, a 1-line response that was the legal and professional equivalent of "no" through the Duke's solicitor, which was the correct channel and which would tell Alderton something useful about the state of the formal proceedings. And after all of that, she thought, she might ask the Duke about the walk along the north boundary. It had, apparently, the best view of the countryside. She wanted to see it. They walked the north boundary at 9:30. The morning had settled into a clear, cold quality, the sky a pale blue that winter announced itself with, the ground hard with the last of the frost in the places the sun had not yet reached. They went out through the kitchen garden and up through the estate's wood, which was old enough that the trees were more like landscape than vegetation, and onto the ridge that formed the estate's northern edge. The view from the ridge was what he had said it was. The countryside opened below, fields and farms and hedgerows in every direction, the whole of the winter English landscape performing itself under the pale sky. It was the kind of view that did what only very good views did, made the person looking at it feel, briefly, that everything was the right size. Elinor stood on the ridge and looked. "Yes," she said, "this is better than the estate maps." The Duke stood beside her. His breath was visible in the cold air. "I haven't been up here in 18 months, he said. "I keep saying I'll come and then something requires me to be somewhere else." "You're here now," she said. "I'm here now," he agreed. They stood for a moment. Below them, a farm cart was moving along a distant road, visible only as a dark shape and the occasional glint of metal in the morning light. "What does the estate need," she said, "after all of this, when it goes back to being normal?" "The drainage," he said. "Which sounds prosaic but has implications for about 60 families who farm this land and whose fields flood every wet spring. It has needed doing for 20 years and has been deferred for 20 years because it requires a decision about the eastern stream course that nobody wanted to make." "Why didn't you make it?" "Because I was new to the title when it first came to my attention," he said, "and because deference to established opinion felt like wisdom when I was 26. It was not wisdom, it was caution past the point of usefulness." He paused. "I have found more recently that decisions deferred beyond their correct moment tend to cost more than decisions made imperfectly at the right time." Elinor thought about this. She thought about the evening in the drawing room 6 years ago when she had found the letters and put them back and said nothing. She thought about what it had cost and what she had paid. "Yes," she said, "I know something about that." They stood in the cold and looked at the view and did not need to say anything else for a moment, which was one of the qualities she was beginning to understand they shared, the comfort with productive silence. "I'd like to stay," she said, "for a while if that's possible." He looked at her. "It's entirely possible." "I have no formal reason to," she said. "The Countess will go to London in 2 days. My employment, such as it was, will follow her there or end. I think I will speak with her. But I suspect she would prefer a companion in London rather than one who has developed a habit of looking into rooms and spilling the wine of dukes." He almost smiled at this. "What would you do?" "There's the question from Carlyle," she said, "which I am seriously considering. I have experience that is useful for the work, and the work is more important than I understood it was before I met someone who had been trying to do it and had been limited by not having my specific skills." "Which are considerable," he said. "Which are specific," she corrected. "I don't flatter myself that they're more than they are, but they are very precisely suited to something." She paused. "Carlyle will take time to formalize. In the interim I need a base, and I find—" She stopped. "What do you find?" he said. She looked at the view instead of at him, because the view was very large and gave her something to look at while she said accurate things. "I find," she said, "that the prospect of returning to the arrangement I had companion to a very pleasant woman, invisible in rooms, doing work I had privately assigned meaning to, is less interesting to me than it was 6 days ago." "Because of what's changed," he said. "Because of several things that have changed," she said. "The work is resolved, the past is dealt with. She paused. "I have more clarity about what I want than I have had in a considerable time." "And what do you want?" She turned to look at him. "I want," she said, with the precision she had told him was what she had, "to stay in a place where I am genuinely useful and genuinely seen. Those two things for a long time seemed like separate requirements. I am revising that." She paused. "I am also aware that this is a great deal to say to a person I have known for 5 days. 4.5, he said. "I've been counting differently." She looked at him. His expression was the one she was not practical about, and it had the quality it always had, steady and direct, and not performing anything. "I asked you something in the carriage," she said, "what you wanted." "Specifically?" "I remember," he said. "The east window," she said, "and someone who reads the books." "Yes," he said. "I would like to be that person," she said, "if the position is still open." He looked at her for a long moment on the cold ridge, with the whole winter countryside behind them. "The position has been open for a very long time," he said. "I was beginning to believe it might be permanent." Alina breathed the cold air. Then it isn't permanent, she said. No, he said, it isn't. They were standing close enough that she was aware of the warmth of him despite the cold. She was aware of the ridge and the view and the sky and the particular quality of the morning, which was the kind of morning that would be easy to remember afterward, the specific color of the light, the hard ground, the farm cart on the distant road, two people on a ridge. He reached out, not to take her hand this time, a different gesture, the back of his fingers against her cheek, very light, the question rather than the answer. She did not move away. She looked at him. I believe you, she said. He understood what she meant by this immediately, because he was the kind of person who understood things without requiring them to be spelled out, and because the words belonged to both of them now, had belonged to both of them since the evening with the wine and the room full of people. He said, I believe you too. And Alina Ashford, who had been practical about almost everything for 4 years, who had carried more than anyone should carry alone and had done it with exceptional efficiency, who had learned to observe and to wait and to trust nothing she could not verify. Alina Ashford stood on the north ridge of Windermere in the cold October morning and let herself be, for one moment, entirely impractical. It was, she found, not as difficult as she had expected. Below them, the countryside went on about its business. Fields and roads and farms and hedgerows, all of it moving toward winter in the usual way, patient and indifferent. They stood on the ridge for a long time. Then they walked back down through the old wood and into the house, and the morning resumed itself around them, and Fletcher had messages, and the Countess needed to discuss departure arrangements, and there was correspondence from Carlyle on the desk in the small study, and all the ordinary urgent machinery of a life was waiting. But the morning had happened, and the ridge had happened, and the whole winter view had been seen together, and these were things that existed now, and would continue to exist in the way that real things do, not requiring maintenance or protection, not subject to the kind of damage that required constant repair. Simply there. Alina went to the study and read Carlyle's letter. It contained 2 items, a formal update on the case, which was proceeding exactly as he had said it would, and a second item, briefer, which asked whether Alina would be available to meet with him in London in a fortnight to discuss a potential arrangement regarding future work. She wrote back yes. She sealed the letter and went to find the Countess. There was work to do. There was also, she thought, for the first time in a very long time, a life that extended beyond the work, warm and specific and waiting to be lived in, and she was not, she decided, going to keep it waiting any longer than necessary. 6 weeks later, Alderton was brought before a formal inquiry. Alina was not in the room when it happened. She had never expected to be, that was not how these things worked, and she had made peace with this before the day arrived. She was in London, at a small desk in a building near the Home Office that did not have a visible name on its door, reading a report that had come in from Bristol about a subsidiary of one of Alderton's financial entities that had been attempting to move assets in advance of the inquiry, which was both illegal and extremely informative. She had been at this desk for 4 weeks. The arrangement with Carlyle had been formalized in the meeting she had attended in early November, in a room that was considerably less intimidating than she had anticipated, and which Carlyle had apparently made deliberately unformal, because he understood that people who had been doing serious work in unofficial capacities deserved to be treated as serious people rather than assets being acquired. He had explained what the role involved. She had asked 12 questions, several of which he said nobody had ever asked before, and one of which he said was the most useful thing anyone had asked in this office in 3 years. She had accepted. She had also, in the weeks since, discovered that the work was what she had expected and several things she had not. It was methodical and sometimes slow, and it required the same quality of sustained attention she had always applied to everything, the ability to hold a great deal of information in active consideration without losing any of it, the ability to be patient when patience was the only productive thing. It also, surprisingly, required the ability to work with other people in a way that drew on her reading of character in an entirely different context from dinner parties and drawing rooms. The people she worked with were not performing for social approval. They were trying to do something specific, and they were interesting in the way that people trying to do something specific were interesting. She had not expected to find the work sociable. She found it was. She was reading the Bristol report when the message came, a note from Carlyle's assistant, brief, The formal inquiry had begun that morning at 9. Alderton was present with his legal representation. The inquiry would take several days. She set the note down, she read the Bristol report, she drank her tea. Outside the window, London was conducting itself in the ordinary way. Grey November, the sound of the city, the particular weight of the air that comes before rain. She had been in London for 6 weeks, living at Clara's in Kensington, which was a smaller space than she would ultimately prefer, but which had the considerable advantage of being Clara's, and which Clara had made clear was permanently available to her regardless of any other arrangements she might make. She thought about the inquiry. She thought about Alderton sitting across a table from men who had the complete documentation of 40 years of his conduct, who had the statement from Whitmore and the testimony of Oakes, and the payment records from Graves, who had her own copied letters with their careful record of what had happened in the winter of 1881 and the spring and winter of 1882. She thought about a man in February of 1882 who had not been able to withdraw from an arrangement in time. She thought about a road and a horse and a dry winter morning, and 2 men at a door, and the particular quality of their faces. She breathed, she looked at the report. At noon she went out to get food from a place 2 streets over that made good soup, which she ate at her desk, because the report needed finishing, and she was genuinely engaged with what the Bristol asset movements indicated about Alderton's broader financial structure, which was more complex than even Graves had known, and suggested that the inquiry would eventually reach people they had not yet identified. This was the part of the work she had not anticipated finding as interesting as she found it, the structural analysis, the way financial instruments and personal relationships and institutional positions formed patterns that, once you had the right vantage point, became as readable as a room. She had always been good at rooms. She was becoming very good at structures. At 2:30, Fletcher arrived. She had not been expecting Fletcher. He appeared at the door of her small office. She had a small office now, which was a development that had surprised her, and which she was gradually getting used to, with an expression that was carefully neutral in a way that told her immediately that he had significant news, and was deciding how to deliver it. "Come in," she said. He came in and closed the door. He stood on the other side of her desk and looked at her. "Oakes is dead," he said. The room was very quiet. "When?" she said. "This morning," he said, "before the inquiry began. He was found at his lodgings in Bristol. It was made to look like a natural cause." He paused. "Carlyle does not believe it was a natural cause." Eleanor sat with this for a moment. She was very still. Her hands were flat on the desk, and she was looking at the wall past Fletcher's shoulder, and she was thinking. "His testimony is already in record," she said. "Yes," Fletcher said. "Everything he said to Carlyle's men is fully documented. It is in the formal inquiry file. It cannot be removed." "Alderton knows this," she said. "Yes." "Then this is not strategic," she said. "Removing Oakes does not change the case. The testimony exists. The documentation exists. Whitmore's statement exists." She paused. "This is punitive." Fletcher was quiet. "He is demonstrating," she said, "that he can still reach people, even from the position he is in. Even with the inquiry opened against him." She stopped. "He is demonstrating that he is not finished." "That is also Carlyle's read," Fletcher said. Eleanor looked at the desk, at the Bristol report, at her own notes, careful and methodical and comprehensive, laid out with the professional exactness of a person who had learned to hold nothing only in her head. "Has Carlyle increased security on Graves?" she said. "Immediately," Fletcher said, "and on Whitmore," and he paused. "He has asked me to tell you that he wants to discuss your arrangements." "My security arrangements," she said. "Yes," Fletcher said. She looked at him. "Alderton knows I'm here. He knew where I was in London 6 weeks ago. He'll know I'm working with Carlyle." "He will," Fletcher said. "Then the discussion with Carlyle should happen today," she said. "Not this afternoon, now." "He's available," Fletcher said. "I came here directly from him." She stood, she put on her coat. She thought for a moment and then picked up the Bristol report, because she intended to continue working regardless of what the security discussion produced. Fletcher observed this and said nothing, which was one of the things she appreciated about Fletcher. They walked to Carlyle's office, which was a 10-minute walk that Eleanor spent thinking about Oakes. Not about his death specifically. She had learned from years of practice not to spend energy on events she could not change, but about what it meant. about the message it was intended to send, about who it was intended to send it to. To Alderton's remaining network, I can still act. To the inquiry, you cannot fully contain me. To the witnesses, this is what cooperation costs. And to Eleanor specifically, because she had been identified from the beginning as a person Alderton considered a particular problem. You are not safe. She walked through the November city and thought about this. Not with fear, she had a particular relationship with fear that was the result of spending years in situations that required her to manage it rather than be managed by it. She felt it, she noted it as information, and she continued. The information was, Alderton was more dangerous in a corner than in the open. The inquiry would constrain him but would not immediately neutralize him. The people around him were still active, and would remain active, until the formal conclusion made their activity cost more than their cooperation with him. She needed to accelerate the Bristol asset analysis. Whatever the assets were being moved toward, understanding it would tell her something about what Alderton intended to do next. She was not, she thought, finished with her work yet. Carlyle met them immediately. He was in the state she had come to associate with him under pressure, the exact same external quality as always, the same large hands, the same pale steady eyes, but with a density to it that suggested a man running 3 considerations simultaneously and containing all of them. Oakes, she said when the door was closed. Yes, he said. You believe it was arranged by Alderton? I believe it, he said. I cannot yet prove it. The manner of death was sufficiently plausible that establishing it as anything other than what it appeared to be will require time and resources. He paused. The good news is that Oakes' testimony is complete and in record and is not affected by his death. The bad news is that it tells Alderton's network something about what Alderton is willing to do. And it tells them that he can still do it, she said. Yes. Eleanor looked at the wall. She thought about Perrott in Southampton, who had also been named, whose involvement had been described as logistical. Perrott had not yet given a statement. He had been located and made aware that the inquiry knew of his involvement, but he had not yet been required to speak. Perrott, she said. Carlyle looked at her. If Alderton can reach Oakes in Bristol, he can reach Perrott in Southampton, she said, and Perrott has not spoken yet. If Perrott is frightened enough by what happened to Oakes to decide that silence is the safer choice. We lose a corroborating witness, Carlyle said. Yes, I've already dispatched someone to Southampton. It's not enough, she said. A person present to observe is not the same as a person giving Perrott a concrete reason to speak rather than to stay silent. What does he want? What would make him trust the process enough to choose cooperation over the fear of what cooperation costs? Carlyle was quiet for a moment. He was looking at her with the expression he had when she said something he had not thought of yet. What does he want? She repeated. He's 63 years old, Carlyle said slowly. His freight business has been partially dependent on Alderton's trade network for 11 years. If Alderton's network collapses, his business collapses. He has 3 children and 7 grandchildren. He wants his business to survive, she said. He wants to know that if he speaks, the consequence won't be the destruction of everything his family depends on. Can we offer that? Carlyle said. Not absolutely, she said. We can offer him a realistic assessment of his position. We can show him that the inquiry will proceed regardless of whether he speaks or not, and that the collapse of Alderton's network is already in process, and that the only question is whether he is identified in the final record as a man who cooperated or a man who obstructed. She paused. We can also show him what happened to Oakes, which is the consequence of being the kind of person Alderton trusts. And we can contrast that with what happened to Graves, who is currently alive and comfortable in Oxfordshire. Carlyle looked at her for a long moment. You should go to Southampton, he said. She had expected this. Yes, she said. When? Tomorrow morning, he said. I'll arrange the travel. I'll need everything you have on Perrott, she said. His business, his family, his history with Alderton's network. The more specific and accurate I am when I speak with him, the more credible I am. You'll have it by tonight, Carlyle said. She stood. Fletcher stood too. Miss Ashford, Carlyle said. She looked at him. Be careful, he said. Oakes was reached in his own lodgings. Alderton still has functional resources. I know, she said. I'll take precautions. Including, he said, The precaution of telling someone where you'll be and what time you expect to return from every appointment. She looked at him. You mean Fletcher? I mean Fletcher and others, he said. All right, she said. She went back to her small office, and she finished the Bristol report, and she wrote a very concise summary of her conclusions about the asset movements, which she left on Carlyle's desk on her way out at 6 that evening. Then she walked back to Kensington in the dark November evening, through streets that were lit and busy and entirely unaware of the various complicated things happening within them. And she thought about Perrott and what she would say to him and how she would say it, and she thought about Oakes, and she thought about the months ahead. At Clara's, she ate dinner and told Clara what had happened. Clara listened without interrupting, which was not characteristic. Clara had very good questions and usually asked them promptly, and when Eleanor finished, Clara sat for a moment. What do you need? Clara said. Nothing specific right now, Eleanor said. I have what I need. You know, Clara said, that I mean a broader nothing, not what you need for tomorrow, what you need. Eleanor looked at her. Clara looked back with her straight, clear regard. I'm going to write a letter, Eleanor said. Clara nodded once, which was her version of saying everything she had decided not to say. Eleanor went upstairs and she sat at the writing desk, and she wrote a letter to Windermere. She wrote it to Adrian, not to the Duke, which was a distinction she made without deliberation, because the deliberation had been completed on a ridge 6 weeks ago. She told him about Oakes, she told him about Southampton, she told him what she thought Perrott would require to speak and how she intended to give it to him. Then she wrote, I find I want you to know this, not because it requires your action or your resources, simply because I find more reliably each week that the things I want to tell someone, I want to tell you specifically. She looked at this for a moment. She sent it. Then she laid out the Perrott files that Carlyle's assistant had brought to the office at 6, and she read until 11, and she went to sleep, and she dreamed of nothing she could remember in the morning. At 7 the next day she was in a carriage heading south toward Southampton, with a bag that contained the Perrott files and 3 changes of clothes, and the small notebook she carried everywhere. And she was thinking about the conversation she was going to have with a 63-year-old freight man who had spent 11 years inside a structure he was now going to have to choose to leave. She knew something about choosing to leave structures that had contained you for a long time. She thought she could speak to him honestly about it. That, she had learned, was usually enough. Perrott's office was on the Southampton dockside in a building that smelled of salt and timber, and the particular combination of anxious business that dockside offices always seem to contain. He was waiting for her. Carlyle's people had informed him she was coming, which she had thought about and decided was correct. Surprise had its uses, but not with a frightened man. A frightened man needed time to prepare himself for doing the difficult thing. She had arrived in Southampton on the morning train. She had eaten breakfast at a small place near the station that was not interested in her appearance or her business, which she appreciated, and she had reviewed the Perrott files for the last time and organized what she knew and what she needed him to understand. Now she sat across from him at a desk covered in ledgers and invoices, and he looked at her with the eyes of a man who had been carrying something heavy and was not sure whether what she was bringing him was relief or more weight. He was 63, as Carlyle had said. He had the look of a man who had spent a long life outdoors doing practical work and who wore the years of it in his face, which was weathered and honest and currently very worried. Miss Ashford, he said. Mr. Perrott, she said, I'll be direct with you because I think you prefer it and because I don't have the patience for anything else. He blinked, then he almost smiled. All right, he said. You know why I'm here, she said. The inquiry, he said. Yes, and I suspect you know about Oakes. His face changed, a brief, specific change, the look of a man who has received news that he has been holding at arm's length and is now being asked to set it down and look at it properly. Yes, he said. Then you understand that Alderton's network still has reach, she said, and that choosing silence, which might have felt like safety 6 months ago, no longer has the same protection it appeared to. He was quiet. Here is the reality of your position, she said. The inquiry has your name and a detailed account of your involvement. This comes from 2 independent sources. Whether you speak or not, your involvement is in the formal record. The question is not whether you appear in the record. The question is how. He looked at his desk. He looked at a photograph on the wall. Family, she guessed, from the size and configuration of it. "What happens to my business?" he said. "Your business has been partially dependent on Alderton's trade network," she said. "That network is collapsing. This will happen regardless of what you do. The question is whether, when it collapses, you are identified as someone who understood what was happening and helped to address it, or whether you are identified as someone who knew and said nothing." "That's not much of a choice," he said. "No," she said, "it isn't, but it is a real one and it has real consequences." She paused. "I can tell you something else. The man who brought documents to us, the man from the legal firm in London, is alive. He is comfortable. His information was protected, and he is protected, and his cooperation has been acknowledged in ways that will matter when the formal process concludes." She paused again. "The man who stayed in his lodgings and kept his head down is dead." Perrott was very still. "I'm not saying this to threaten you," she said. "I am saying it because you have a right to understand the options clearly. Alderton can reach people who are silent. He cannot reach people who are already speaking, because the act of speaking removes his leverage." He looked at the photograph on the wall. 7 grandchildren she had estimated from the files, 3 children. "What would I need to do?" he said. "Speak to Carlyle," she said, "today if you can. Tell him what you know, specifically what your involvement was, what you were asked to do, and what you were told about the reasons for it. You will have legal representation. You will not be tried for the logistical involvement because it was arranged without your full understanding of its purpose." She paused. "The people who made deliberate decisions with full knowledge are the ones the inquiry is concerned with. You were a tool, Mr. Perrott. A tool can choose to stop being used." He looked at her. "How do you know that?" he said. "That it was without full understanding?" "Because I have read everything," she said, "including the payments made to you and the instructions given to you. You were told it was a legitimate private arrangement. You were given no reason to question it until it was too late to question it safely." She kept her eyes on him. "I know this because this is how Alderton operates. He finds people with a small thing he can offer them, and he begins with something entirely ordinary, and by the time the ordinary has become something else, the person is already in far enough that leaving is dangerous." Perrott said nothing. "I know this," she said, "because I have spent a long time trying to understand how someone I loved ended up unable to leave an arrangement he should never have entered." She said this evenly and completely and did not hedge it. "I am not telling you this for your sympathy. I am telling you because I want you to understand that I am not interested in your punishment. I am interested in the truth." He looked at her for a long moment. "The truth," he said. "All of it," she said, "whatever you know." He nodded. It was a slow nod, not reluctant, just the nod of a man taking a weight and setting it down, which is different from refusing to carry it and is actually considerably harder. "I'll speak to your man in London," he said. "Today," she said. "Today," he agreed. She arranged it on the spot with Carlyle's people through the contact she had been given. Perrott's solicitor was reachable by noon and agreed to accompany him. They would be in London by evening. Elinor left Perrott's office and walked back along the dockside. The Southampton waterfront was doing its ordinary business, ships at their moorings, men working, the smell of the sea and the sound of it beyond the buildings. She walked through it with her hands in her coat pockets, and she thought about what she had said about Clifford and about truth, and she thought that it had been the right thing to say and that it had cost her a specific amount and that the amount was manageable. Things that were true were always worth saying. She had learned this late, and she continued to learn it in specific ways each time the truth required something of her. She took the afternoon train back to London. On the train she read, for the last 20 minutes, a letter that had been waiting for her at the Southampton posting office when she arrived, Adrian's response to the letter she had sent before leaving. He had written quickly, which she noted. He had responded to everything she had said about Oaks and Southampton with the precise, direct engagement of someone who read carefully. And at the end, after the practical responses, "I want to know these things too, not because they require my action, because they are yours and you are telling me, and that is enough." She read this on the train with the Hampshire countryside going past in the grey November light, and she sat with it, and it settled in the same place things settled when they were true. She arrived back in London at 5:30. She went to the Home Office and delivered a brief report on the Southampton visit and confirmed Perrott's arrival with Carlyle's assistant. She walked to Kensington in the dark. Clara was in the kitchen. She looked up when Alina came in and assessed the result with one look. Successful, Clara said. Yes, Alina said. Sit, Clara said, I'll make food. Alina sat. There's a letter on the table, Clara said, came this afternoon. Alina looked. Another letter from Windermere, or rather from the house in London the Duke maintained, which was the Mayfair address she had the number of and which was close enough to Kensington that a letter sent in the morning arrived in the afternoon. She opened it. It was short. It said, I will be in London tomorrow, not for anything that requires urgency, simply because I find more reliably each week that the things I want to do involve being where you are. She sat at Clara's kitchen table with the letter in her hand, while Clara made food and the kitchen was warm and the city went on outside the window. She thought about the inquiry which would continue. She thought about Perrott, who was somewhere in the city tonight, speaking to Carlyle's people, adding his piece to the record. She thought about Graves in Oxfordshire and Whitmore in his London office and the slow, thorough machinery of consequence completing itself. She thought about a dinner party 6 weeks ago, a glass of wine, a room full of people, and a man who had crossed to her and taken her hand and said 3 words. She thought about all of it, and she thought about tomorrow. Clara, she said. Yes, Clara said. He's coming to London tomorrow, she said. Clara turned from the stove. She looked at Alina with her straight, clear, impossible eyes. I know, she said. You know, Alina said. He wrote to me as well, Clara said, with the perfect neutrality of a woman who had managed the information for the entire afternoon without saying anything. Alina looked at her. He asked, Clara said, whether he might call at a reasonable hour that would not inconvenience the household. She paused. I told him 10 o'clock was perfectly adequate. Alina thought about the fact that the Duke of Windermere had written to her former companion to request a house call at a socially appropriate time, and she thought about what this said about him, which was very much what she already knew. What did you make of the letter? She said. I thought it was extremely correct, Clara said. She turned back to the stove. I also thought it was the letter of a man who understands how to do things properly, which is a quality that has been somewhat rare in my observation. Alina looked at the letter in her hand. Yes, she said. It is. She ate dinner and she helped Clara with the washing up, which she always did regardless of whether it was expected, and then she went upstairs and she sat at the writing desk. She did not write a letter. She had said what she had to say. It had been received. He would be here tomorrow. She sat for a while in the quiet. 4 years and 8 months of carrying something. Now it was in the record, and the record was in the hands of people who would use it, and the machinery of consequence was in motion. And tomorrow there would be a knock at 10 o'clock and Clara would open the door, and Alina would come downstairs, and the specific future that had been entirely invisible from where she had stood for 4 years would be there, ordinary and immediate. She was ready for it. She had been ready for a long time. She just hadn't had the door. He knocked at 5 minutes to 10. Clara opened the door. Alina heard this from the upstairs room where she was finishing getting dressed, and was aware of it with the particular awareness she had of things that mattered, specific and complete. She heard Clara's voice and then his, which was a distinct quality, something she would now recognize in any context and at any distance, and then the sound of the door and footsteps in the hall below. She came downstairs. He was standing in the narrow hall, hat in hand, coat dark from the November outside, and he looked the way he always looked, contained and complete and present in a way that some people managed and most did not. He looked up when she appeared on the stairs, and his face did the thing it did, the quiet adjustment of something settling into place. Good morning, she said. Good morning, he said. Clara appeared from the kitchen with the expression of a woman who intended to make tea and had absolutely no other agenda. They went into the front parlor. The November morning came through the window in its gray particular light. Clara brought tea and left it on the table and disappeared with the professional discretion of 40 years' practice. They sat across from each other with the tea between them. How was Southampton? He asked. Successful, she said. Perrott spoke to Carlyle last night. His statement is in the file this morning. And his safety? Carlyle is managing it, she said. The same arrangements as for Graves. He's frightened but cooperative, and he understands, I think, what cooperation means for him going forward. Good, he said. He was looking at her with the quality he had had since the first evening, direct and steady, and she was looking back, and there was between them the particular ease of people who had, over the past 7 weeks, arrived at a wordless understanding about what their silences contained. Alderton, she said. The inquiry is proceeding, he said. Fletcher has been informed through Carlyle's people that the first week produced significant results. Several of the individuals in Alderton's financial network have withdrawn their positions in anticipation of what's coming. His social standing is deteriorating considerably. He paused. The name we identified, the government connection, has stepped down from his position. Quietly, the official reason is health. It will always be the official reason, she said. Yes, he said, that's how these things work. The real reasons are in the record. The official reason is health or family concerns or a desire to pursue private interests. And the record is there, and the people who need to know what it contains will know. Elinor looked at the window. It will not be sufficient, she said. There are people in this who will not face any consequence beyond the one they choose to give themselves, which is no consequence at all. No, he agreed, it won't be sufficient for all of it. It never is, he looked at her. Is it sufficient for you? She thought about this honestly. She had been thinking about it since the inquiry began, in the particular way she thought about things she needed to be accurate about rather than comfortable. Clifford's death will be in the record as what it was, she said. The people responsible will be named. Oakes, who is dead, named them in testimony that is formally preserved. Whitmore named them. Perrott will name them. The chain of responsibility is complete and documented and will be accessible to anyone who chooses to look. She paused. What will not happen is a criminal trial that produces a verdict and a sentence. The evidence of intent is indirect. The direct actors are dead or disappeared. The people at the top, she stopped. The people at the top will face the inquiry and the financial consequences and the end of the positions that depended on their integrity remaining intact, he said carefully, which is not the same as a verdict. No, she said. Is it enough? She sat with the question. She had been sitting with versions of it for 4 years and 8 months. She had expected, when she finally had this conversation with herself, that the answer would be either yes or no in a clear and final way. It was neither. It is the most that was available, she said finally. The system did not build itself to address what Alderton did. The system built itself to accommodate what Alderton did, at every stage, at every point where it could have been stopped. What Carlyle has produced is the maximum result from a system that was not designed to fully account for this. She stopped. So it is not enough in the absolute sense, but it is the most that was possible, and the most that was possible is considerably more than what has existed in the record for the past 4 years, which was nothing. She looked at him. I find that I can live with this. He looked at her carefully. You're certain? I am not certain of everything, she said. I am certain that I have done what was in my capacity to do, and that it is in the record, and that Clifford's death is now a documented truth rather than an officially unexamined tragedy. That is the thing I needed. The other things, the verdict, the sentence, the public accounting, those would be better but are not what I have, and wanting them does not make them available. No, he said. She looked at the tea. I used to think, she said, that the only acceptable conclusion was the complete one, that anything less than a full reckoning was a failure. She paused. I have revised this. Partial reckonings are what human systems produce when they have been adequately pressed. The pressing matters, the record matters. The incompleteness does not erase the achievement of having a record at all. He was quiet for a moment. That's a hard thing to arrive at, he said. Yes, she said, it took some time. She picked up her tea. I find I am no longer angry about it, which I think is the actual measure. Not that I'm satisfied, I don't think satisfied is the right word, but the anger is. She searched for the right description. It's finished its work, she said. I needed it for 4 years and it was useful and now it is done. He looked at her. What comes after anger, he said. She looked at him across the tea and the grey November morning, and the small parlour where 4 weeks ago she had sat alone thinking about Southampton. This, she said, what I have now, which is considerably more interesting. He held her gaze, then he set down his cup and said, I wanted to ask you something. Yes, she said. I have been thinking for the past several weeks about arrangements. He paused. Practical arrangements, which are not particularly romantic, but which I think require discussion before other things can proceed properly." Elinor looked at him. She had a sense of where this was going, and she let it go where it was going because she had decided, on the North Ridge and in the library and in the letters, and in all the specific ordinary moments of the past 7 weeks, to let things arrive rather than manage their arrival. "I have a house in London that is too large for one person," he said. "I also have an estate in the country that is not too large, but which has been missing something for a considerable time. I have work that matters to me, and I have—" He stopped. He was, she noticed, choosing words with the same unusual care he had applied once before, on a London pavement, when he had said something she had needed him to say. "You have what?" she said. "I have found," he said, "that the most useful things I have done in the last 7 weeks have been of 2 kinds. The kind that I did as myself, managing the estate, working with Carlyle, managing the aftermath of everything Alderton set in motion. And the kind that I did in the context of you, which is a different quality entirely, more specific, more, I'm not certain of the word." "Complete," she said. He looked at her. "Yes," he said, "complete." She let this settle. "I am not," he said, "the kind of man who makes arrangements that cannot be kept. I'm also not the kind of man who can." He stopped again. She had not seen him have difficulty with words before, and she found it affected her, which she noted and did not try to manage. "What can't you do?" she said. "I cannot maintain the appropriate distance," he said. "That is the precise problem. I can maintain whatever arrangement is correct for the situation. I can manage the social and professional parameters of this without difficulty. What I have been finding increasingly is that the appropriate distance between us is—" He paused. "Incorrect," he said. "That is the word. The appropriate distance feels incorrect, which I recognize is an odd thing to say to a woman I have known for 7 weeks. 6 days in person," she said, "then 7 weeks of letters." "Yes," he said. "Letters are not an inconsiderable amount of time," she said. "No," he agreed. She looked at him. She had prepared for this, in the way she prepared for things, not by scripting it, but by being honest with herself about what she wanted the outcome to be, so that when the moment arrived she could be clear about it rather than performing clarity she did not have. She was clear. She was clear in the way she had been clear about certain things since the first evening, the wine, the room, the 3 words. Clarity had been the problem. The working out of what to do with the clarity had taken longer. "You want to make this an arrangement," she said. "I want to make this a life," he said. He said it with the same simplicity as everything that mattered, plainly and completely, and without ornament, which is a more significant thing than an arrangement. I am aware that I am asking this significantly earlier than is conventional. I am also aware that convention has played a limited role in our acquaintance." "It has played essentially no role," she said. "No," he agreed. She looked at him. She thought about the Countess who had said, "Whatever you decide." She thought about Clara who had said, "Keep him." She thought about a ridge in October and a library and a letter that said, "Because you are telling me, and that is enough." She thought about 4 years of carrying something alone, and 7 weeks of learning that the alternative was possible. "You should know," she said, "that I am not easy." "I know this," he said. "I have habits," she said, "of watching and of managing and of keeping things until I understand them fully before I share them, which is sometimes useful and sometimes not." "I know this," he said. "I have a job," she said, "that I intend to keep. That will require my attention and my time and will occasionally take me to places like Southampton on short notice." "I know this," he said. "I support this entirely." "I will not always be where you want me to be," she said, "or available when you expect me to be." "I know," he said. He was looking at her with the particular patience of a man who had decided something and was not going to be moved by the working out of it. She looked at him. "And you want this anyway," she said. "I want this because of these things," he said, "not in spite of them. The person who does these things is the person I want." He paused. "That is, I hope, the correct thing to say." "It is," she said, "exactly the correct thing." She picked up her tea and drank it and set it down, and he picked up his tea and drank it and set it down, and they sat for a moment in the grey November parlor with everything arranged between them in the only way it could be arranged, which was honestly. "Then yes," she said. He looked at her. "Yes," she said again, "to the life you mentioned, to the arrangement that isn't an arrangement, to the east window and the lower shelves and the north ridge and the rest of it. She paused. To this, he said nothing for a moment. Then he said, good, which was exactly the right word, and she knew it, and she felt it settle in the same place the other word had settled, the one he had said 7 weeks ago in a room full of people, the one that had started all of this. Clara appeared at the door with the precision of a woman who had been on the other side of it for exactly the right amount of time. More tea, she said. Yes, Alina said. Yes, Adrian said. Clara looked between the two of them with the expression of a woman arriving at a conclusion she had been moving toward for 7 weeks and finding it entirely satisfactory. She went to get the tea. Alina looked at the window. The November morning was the same gray it had been, unchanged, indifferent, the city going on outside the way it always did. She was aware of everything that had happened in the last 7 weeks and in the 7 weeks before that, and in the 4 years and 8 months before all of it, the full weight of it, the cost of it, the exhausting particular discipline of carrying something that was hers alone for a very long time. And she was aware of the man sitting across from her, who had said 3 words 7 weeks ago, and had built everything since on the foundation of them, and who was now sitting in Clara's parlor waiting for more tea with the complete, easy presence of a person who had arrived where he intended to be. She had done that, she had found that, after everything. She sat back in her chair. Clara came back with the tea and they drank it, the 3 of them, in the quiet November morning, and the conversation moved to practical things, when he might come back to London, whether Alina had planned the timing of her next visit to Windermere, what Clara's opinion was of a particular question regarding the north boundary drainage. Clara's opinion was detailed and correct, which Alina found unsurprising. It was, she thought, a very ordinary morning. She had not understood before how extraordinary it was to have an ordinary morning. She understood it now. They walked in the afternoon. Not to anywhere specific, just through the Kensington streets in the cold November air, at the pace of people who were not hurrying because they did not need to, past the gates of the park and along the path that ran parallel to the water. The trees were completely bare now. The sky was the color it had been all morning, pale and wide and consistent. In the spring, she said at one point, the estate grounds will be different. Considerably, he said. I'd like to see them in the spring, she said. They're available to you, he said, at all times including spring. She looked at the path ahead of them. I know, she said, I'm saying I want to. I know you're saying it, he said. I find I like hearing it. She turned to look at him briefly and found him looking at her, and the quality between them was the quality it had been since the North Ridge, warm and specific, and not requiring anything except to be acknowledged. She acknowledged it. Then she looked back at the path, and they walked, and London went on around them, busy and indifferent and enormous, entirely uninvested in the small specific fact of 2 people walking beside each other in November with the winter ahead and the spring after it. But Alina was invested in it. She was, she found, entirely invested in all of it, the winter, the spring, the east window, the maps, the drainage plan, the small desk near the Home Office, the letters that would continue going back and forth between London and Windermere, the mornings that were simply mornings. The whole long, ordinary, extraordinary stretch of it. She breathed the cold November air. She was ready. That evening, back at Clara's, after Adrian had left and the lamp was on and Clara was knitting in the chair by the fire, Alina sat at the writing desk. She took out a piece of paper, she wrote the date at the top, she sat for a moment. Then she wrote, the weight I carried for 4 years is now in the record where it belongs. I do not need to carry it any further. She sat with this for a moment. Then she wrote, what I carry now is different. It is considerably lighter, and I am carrying it with someone which I have not done before and which turns out to be the correct way to carry things. She sat with that too. Then she sealed the letter. It was for Clara, in the way all the important letters were for Clara, even though Clara was in the next room, and she put it on the desk to hand her in the morning. She looked at the lamp. She thought about a wine glass tipped in October candlelight, and a room going still, and a man crossing toward her. She thought about 3 words. She had said them back to him, eventually, on a ridge in November in a small parlor over tea. She had said them in her own way, not those specific words, because they were his and she had other words, but the same content, the same intention, the same complete and simple act of saying the true thing to the right person. And he had believed her, as she had always known he would. She turned off the lamp. The room was dark and warm, and the city was outside, and the future was there, ordinary and open, waiting with the perfect patience of something that had already begun and would continue for a very long time. She went to sleep. She slept deeply and without anything she needed to keep watch for, which was the most particular kind of rest there was, and which she had not had in a long time, and which she intended, going forward, to have as often as possible. Outside, London did what it always did. Inside, Eleanor Ashford had finally, entirely come home.